session. The executive session was for the purposes of discussing negotiations with Jeff Hull, a town manager, over the terms of potential employment agreement in accordance with MGL Chapter 30A, Section 21A2, and further for the purpose of discussing strategies with respect to litigation involving New England Transrail with respect to their petition before the Federal Service Transportation Board in accordance with MGL Chapter 30A, Section 21A3, as an open meeting may have detrimental effects to the town's position, and further to approve executive session minutes of October 9th. Would you all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Please note that members of the Board of Selectmen and the town manager and Bev, the clerk, is wearing an item of pink for Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Thank you all for doing that. We have some treasury warrants for transmittal. We have Treasury warrant 15, 15A, 16, 16A. Do we have a motion to accept?
So moved. Second.
Motion by Mr. McCoy, seconded by Mr. Bendel. Any discussion? All in favor? It's unanimous. We have minutes of the October 9th meeting. Everybody had an opportunity to go through them. Excuse me, I have a little bit of a cold this evening. Is there a motion to accept the minutes?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Bendel, second by Mr. Loud. Any discussion on the minutes? Errors, omissions, changes, corrections? Hearing none, all in favor? Unanimous. Okay, as I said, we're running a little bit late, and we're to our first appointment, and that's Karen Levesque for the right-of-way. She's a right-of-way manager and from Verizon, and this is going to be a public hearing. Is Karen here?
Mr. Chair, I would just note that we found out today, after having this site checked by our engineer, that the proposed location of the pole is actually on a location that is over a catch basin. Paul Looney reviewed this, advised me of this fact. He was also in touch with Ms. Levesque, and she, as a consequence, is withdrawing the petition for now. I think they'll be looking to relocate the pole.
Okay, thank you. So we don't need a motion on that to withdraw it, do we?
No, they
Okay.
will
They pulled it
contact
out.
us, yep.
All right. All right, so our 7:10 appointment is with Scott C. Grant, Chairman of the 4th of July Committee. Mr. Grant, are you here? And I see Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go
Good
ahead.
evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
So this year's annual tree lighting is scheduled for Saturday, December 1st at the Town Common. Beginning at 4 o'clock, we anticipate, as we have in years past, having horse-drawn hay rides, kiddie rides presented by Cushing Amusements, cookies and hot chocolate, ice sculpture sponsored by the Wilmington Tewksbury Chamber of Commerce and several of its members, Wilmington Minuteman with lanterns to accompany Santa from the fire truck to the gazebo to light the lights, Wilmington High School a cappella group, Wilmington High School cheerleaders volunteering their time, Wilmington Community Fund with its annual Wilmington-themed Christmas tree ornament sale, members of the Wilmington Fire Department collecting unwrapped toys and donations for Wilmington children, and a presentation from clergy of various parishes here in Wilmington. Santa will arrive courtesy of the fire department at 6 p.m. and light the commons to start the season here in Wilmington, and will be available in the 4th of July building thereafter for pictures with the kids, which are posted on our website. Kids and adults. Thank you to the board, as always, for its support, and to Jeff and the town administration, department heads, for all the effort they put into this. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Okay, does anybody have any questions? It's always a great time, that I know. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'll just comment, thank you, Scott, for being here, and we look forward to it. My family and I always, it's a good take for us, and it's always a big turnout for the community and a nice way to kick off the holiday season. So thanks for putting this on, and appreciate the work you and your group do, and we look forward to it.
our
Hopefully it won't be too cold that night.
We'll hope for snow, not rain.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you.
I'll just say to echo my colleagues, and I'm sure we'll go right down the road, we appreciate all the work that you do, Mr. Grant, and the whole Fourth of July committee, outstanding, not only for the Christmas tree lighting of the trees, the lights, and Fourth of July festivities. It's always a grand old time, so appreciate everything that you folks do out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just echo my colleagues' compliments to you and the Fourth of July Committee for continuing to build community spirit. So, thanks, Scott.
I'd like to also echo my colleagues and thank you and your committee. What time did you say it started, the festivities?
4
start?
o'clock.
4 p.m. I didn't hear that. Thank you, and thank you for everything you guys do.
That's right. Thank you. Our pleasure.
Thank you. True sense of volunteer work by the community, your committee. It's outstanding what you do year after year, and the energy that you get from each other just to keep it going. It's amazing, and I want to thank all the volunteers for all the time and the effort and the work that you do year after year. Very much appreciated.
It's really true that the energy that we get really comes from the people who come to the Common.
All right, is there, we're going to take up a motion for the request.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Bendel, seconded by Mr. Eaton. Any further discussion or questions, comments? All in favor? And it's unanimous.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
We're right on time, a 7:20 appointment. All right, our 7:20 appointment is with Michael J. Newhouse Esquire. Request for written consent to represent Eames Street Member LLC, GFI.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Newhouse?
Members of the board. Thank you for the opportunity to be here this evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the Board of Selectmen. Just for the record, my name is Michael Newhouse. I'm an attorney with offices at 20 Middlesex Avenue here in Wilmington. I appear before you this evening on a request that I think is outlined in a transmittal letter to the manager. I did want to take an opportunity before getting into the substance of the request, for the benefit of folks who don't know me, for the benefit of folks who may be watching on TV or here in the audience. I think it might be helpful if I could just give some of the history that makes this request prudent, if not necessary. So going back to 2001, I served as town council for the town of Wilmington from October 2001 through June of 2003. Subsequent to that, I was elected to the Board of Selectmen, and it was my privilege to serve on the board from April of 2004 through April of 2016, or May of 2016. As the board is well aware, and some folks in the audience, I'm sure, are aware, there are certain rules and laws that regulate the certain things that former municipal employees can participate in. And that is often referred to as the conflict of interest laws. And it's Chapter 268A. So when Mr. Goodman, who's here to my right, he's a principal of GFI Partners, which is a real estate management investment firm based in Boston. GFI is also involved in the ownership of numerous commercial buildings and facilities, and specifically warehousing facilities. When Mr. Goodman first came to talk to me earlier this year about the prospect of representing GFI and Eames Street Member LLC, and I'll certainly explain that corporate structure here this evening. But when he first came to meet with me, I advised Mr. Goodman that there were certain things that I had to look into. So one of the things that I always ask myself when I have a prospective client who consults with me and we discuss the prospect of representing the client relative to permitting, land use, or zoning, or town meeting, anything like that that involves the town of Wilmington, I always ask myself 3 questions. The first question is, if I weren't being paid to represent that client, would I support the initiative that they're trying to put forth? The second thing I ask myself is whether or not I think that the prospective client has the wherewithal, financial and otherwise, to see through a project to its fruition. And the third thing that I always ask myself is whether or not I believe that the project in the end is going to look the way that it's described to me right from the outset. And if any of the answers to those questions are no, quite simply, I decline the representation. In this particular case, the answer to all those questions, when I discuss them with Mr. Goodman and his team, members of which are here this evening as well to answer questions, to me, the answer to all those questions were yes. In this particular case, given the prospective subject matter of the representation, I had some additional things that I need to vet. So Mr. Goodman's conceptual proposal is to develop a warehousing facility, a general warehousing facility at the 51 Eames Street property. As the board is well aware, and many folks in this community are well aware, that same property is the subject and has been the subject of a petition before the Surface Transportation Board, which is a federal agency that grants essentially relief from local zoning and other land use requirements. This property has been the subject of an STB petition dating back to 2003. So that implicates a couple of things. First of all, it implicates Chapter 268A, both in my capacity as town council in 2003 and in my capacity as a selectman from 2004 to 2016. I was certainly involved in a number of issues related to that particular site, not the least of which were a number of meetings and votes and public discussions and executive session discussions about the merits of the Surface Transportation Board and NET's proposal. So based on that history, I needed to look at whether or not the constraints of 268A would allow me to represent Mr. Goodman's company. Secondly, as an attorney, whenever you have a prospective client that has an interest in a site or a transaction or a contract that may be adverse to the interests of a former client, there are professional rules of conduct that one needs to follow to make sure that you don't run afoul of your obligations purely as an attorney. And then the other thing that I considered, which was really more specific to this case, was under what conditions would I be willing to represent this firm given the pending NET application before the Surface Transportation Board. So I'd like to take those 3 issues up in order. So 268A, and specifically Section 18A of that statute, bars a former municipal employee forever from participating in a particular matter in which that former municipal employee participated in as back when that person was a municipal employee. So in this case, having served both as town council and as a member of the Board of Selectmen, I needed to make sure that by representing a client that brings forward a local permitting initiative that is proposed to be on the same site that was the subject matter of the STB petition, I need to make sure that it was within my ability to represent that client. And certainly, it's my opinion that I am, and I can go into the details of 268A, but for the purposes of the board, I would just suggest that the bottom line on that, based on my communications and the opinion that I've gotten from the State Ethics Commission is that it's a different particular matter. It's not the same matter. That's clearly my opinion. I understand that you've consulted with counsel. I presume that is counsel's opinion as well. But quite frankly, in the end, on that particular question, the only arbiter of that fact is the State Ethics Commission. And I presume that you've been provided a copy of the letter that I obtained some time ago from the State Ethics Commission, which opines that the proposal that I hope to represent is just a different matter from the STB matter. The other issue in terms of the rules of professional conduct, there are a couple different rules that arguably apply. In an abundance of caution, I'm proceeding under what's referred to as Rule 1.9. Rule 1.9 essentially says that if there's a matter that's adverse to the interests of a client that I used to represent, and that I propose to work on the same matter, a substantially related matter, that I'm prohibited from doing that unless I get the consent in writing from a former client. So in this regard, there certainly is a perspective that says that I really don't need to do that because it's a different matter. And in fact, the notes to that rule under the SJC rules are pretty specific about what constitutes a substantially related matter. And quite frankly, my interpretation of the rule is that it doesn't apply here. But that said, from both a personal perspective, from a professional perspective, as somebody who resides in the town of Wilmington, who maintains a practice in Wilmington, and frankly, I don't have any intentions of going anywhere else. I'm just not interested in proceeding unless I, in fact, go to my former client, and that's the Board of Selectmen on behalf of the town of Wilmington, and ask for your consent to move forward with this representation. The third thing that I had mentioned previously was the idea of being comfortable that the New England Transrail petition that's pending before the STB becomes a non-factor for the town of Wilmington. So going back several months in the first conversations that I had with Mr. Goodman, I pointed out that it would be a condition of my engagement that Mr. Goodman would see to it that there'd be a standstill agreement in place between the town of Wilmington, NET, and all the different corporate entities. And I know that through Mr. Hull, that certainly has been the town's position as well. Mr. Goodman was very receptive to that, and as I understand it, that agreement has been struck between the parties subject to the Board of Selectmen's approval, and I understand that you're in executive session in that regard tonight. So the bottom line here is that the Board of Selectmen, to my way of thinking, it makes perfect sense to provide the consent that I'm asking for. I'm willing to answer any questions you have about the prospective relationship between the client and myself. Eames Street Member LLC is a sole purpose company that was created for the purposes of hopefully acquiring an interest in the property of 51 Eames Street, hopefully moving forward with a general warehousing application for local permitting, which would comply in all respects with the local bylaws, and in no way whatsoever would be subject to any exemption from the Surface Transportation Board or any other federal agency for that matter. This is an alternative to what's already been brought forward by NET and the parties who have an interest in the petition that's pending before the STB. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions that the board or anybody else has with regard to that request.
Thank you, Mr. Newhouse. Thank you for your presentation. It was very informative. I would like to introduce to the audience that we have Dan Deutsch here from Brooks and Durensis. Dan is a special town counsel with issues with Olin and NET issues, and if there are any standstill agreement issues that are questions that come up, maybe Dan can address those. We also have with us this evening our town council from KP Law, Mark Rich, and I would like Mark to speak, if he could, on the written consent of Mr. Newhouse, if you could.
I don't know where you would like me to be. I can be heard. I don't have microphones.
Yeah.
Feel
You wanna-
Stand next to Mr. Bendel if he doesn't mind my crouching over him. So, thank you, members of the board. I think you've heard, quite an extensive presentation from Mr. Newhouse. Mr. Newhouse, just to give you some background, Mr. Newhouse and I have had a number of discussions about this issue. Prior to this, just also for clarification, I've never met Mr. Newhouse before. In fact, this is the first time we're seeing each other. We did not know each other prior to this, but I will say that Mr. Newhouse is very forthcoming in discussing this matter, providing me with whatever information was necessary to back up the very issues that were presented tonight. So as Mr. Newhouse has indicated, his initial request to the town through a letter that he sent to the town manager was for what is known as written informed consent of the Board of Selectmen as the prior employer of himself as town council under the ethical rules, so that he could represent a client in a matter that might be related to a matter that with which he was involved previously as town council. As Mr. Newhouse indicated, there's also the implications of Chapter 268A, the conflict of interest law, specifically Section 18, involving former municipal employees acting as attorneys or representatives of other parties. The Chapter 268A issue, as you may know, conflicts of interest run generally to the individual. There are certain circumstances where an appointing authority would be able to waive or essentially excuse a potential conflict of interest, give a waiver of that conflict. That doesn't apply to Section 18. Section 18 either applies or it doesn't. As Mr. Newhouse indicated, under Section 18A, it's a permanent bar for an individual who was involved in a matter that while he was an employee of the town. In this case, the issue was raised with the Ethics Commission, the State Ethics Commission, which oversees application of Chapter 268A, and the Ethics Commission concluded that where the Surface Transportation Board, in looking forward at the NET matter, would not be reviewing any prior actions, any prior exemptions or petitions that came before the STB, but would only be looking forward at any new petitions, that this matter in essence constitutes a new matter, and so the GFI matter is separate and apart from the previous New England Transrail matter, and therefore constitute a new matter and would not be subject to Chapter 268A, Section 18A of the Conflict of Interest Law. And so that issue was essentially put aside. And as Mr. Newhouse correctly pointed out, that will be a matter for consideration by the Ethics Commission. This body does not really, is not an arbiter of the ethics issue with respect to Chapter 268A, Section 18A. Where this does come before this board is the request under the ethical rule, which was the subject of Mr. Newhouse's September 5th letter. And as indicated, that rule requires that the employee notifies, Rule 1.9 of the Rules of Professional Conduct, duties to former clients, pertinent part, which is on page 2 of my letter. A lawyer who has formally represented a client in a matter shall not thereafter represent another person in the same or a substantially related matter in which that person's interests are materially adverse to the interests of the former client, unless the former client gives informed consent confirmed in writing. So what we're dealing with now is whether this board, as the former client, will give informed consent in writing with respect to this matter. And the issues of consideration is whether this matter is the same or substantially related to the matter in which Mr. Newhouse was previously involved when he was town council, and whether the interests of the new client, GFI, are materially adverse to the interests of the former client. So in this matter, the town would have to determine, again, Board of Selectmen would have to determine whether the GFI proposal is the same or substantially related to the NET matter. And as we know, The NET matter was the subject of consideration by the Surface Transportation Board, subject to petitions, and is essentially an ongoing matter, hotly contested by the town. The proposal from GFI is as I understand it, is a very different matter in the sense that it does not involve any existing petition before the Surface Transportation Board. It would not be the subject of, nor would it be considered as part of the NET petition that is pending before the Surface Transportation Board. Further, in my discussions with Mr. Newhouse, the issue of whether the interests are materially adverse, that gets into the issue of whether any advice that Mr. Newhouse previously provided to the board, any discussions that may have occurred in executive session during his employment as town council by the board would come to play during his representation, or his proposed representation of GFI. And again, where the representation that Mr. Newhouse provided to the town related to petitions and opposition to petitions with respect to NET, petitions that are not germane specifically to the GFI proposal, it does not seem in that balancing of the issues that those matters and that discussion would come to play with respect to Mr. Newhouse's representation of GFI. And again, consistent with the determinations made by the Ethics Commission, the sense is that this is essentially a wholly separate matter. What was interesting is that the opinion of the Ethics Commission also recommended that Mr. Newhouse consult with the Board of Bar Overseers. The Board of Bar Overseers is essentially, our governing body in terms of disciplinary actions, kind of provides oversight to attorneys. And in discussions with Mr. Newhouse recognized the recommendation of the Ethics Commission, and he also went to the Board of Bar Overseers to get some advice and direction from the Board of Bar Overseers. That board is generally reluctant to put issues in writing unless they are actually taking discipline. They don't really give advisory opinions. They will provide advice over the phone, but not necessarily put it in writing. So Mr. Newhouse did not have a letter to present from the Board of Bar Overseers, but he did speak to the board, and the board essentially gave some guidance, and the result that came to me from Mr. Newhouse was a commitment that Mr. Newhouse would not be involved in any way with respect to any of the matters that preceded the GFI matter, that he would not be providing advice or information regarding any of the executive session discussions that happened while he was town council, and that he would not be discussing with GFI any advice that he provided to the town, because again, that advice would not be germane to the GFI matter, and his comments would not, he would not be representing GFI before the Surface Transportation Board, would not be involved in any petitions before the Surface Transportation Board on the GFI matter. So again, he's essentially divorced himself from that aspect of any project on that property. Notwithstanding the fact that it really doesn't apply to GFI, he's made it clear that he would not be participating in that. And of course, should that matter come up, and should Mr. Newhouse become involved in matters that intrude upon what preceded this matter, that will be certainly a cause for further discussion on this matter. But as it stands right now, as the facts were presented with respect to Mr. Newhouse's involvement, my discussion with Mr. Newhouse, my review of the Ethics Commission opinion, my review of the guidance that was provided by the Board of Bar Overseers, my review of the conflict of interest law and the rules of ethical conduct. In my opinion, this is something that's within the jurisdiction and discretion of the Board of Selectmen to determine that this would be a wholly different matter, not subject to the bar of Chapter 268A, and would be subject to the granting of the informed consent as requested by Mr. Newhouse. And I'm certainly available for any questions or further discussion. And I apologize if that was a lengthy discussion, but I think it warranted that discussion given how much time has been spent on the matter in the past.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to open it up to my colleagues on the board for Mr. Bendel for any questions.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Good evening. Thank you for your presentation. My question through you, Mr. Chairman, if appropriate, I'd like to ask Town Council a question.
Sure.
Thank you. Sir, I appreciate that overview there. My question for you is, we've got a number of indications here that everything seems to be by the book for Mr. Newhouse. I just want to be clear, regardless of the vote taken by this board tonight, is there any conflict of interest there? Is there any violation that the board could be in, whether the vote is in the affirmative or the negative?
Thank you, Mr. Selectman. I think that's a very good question, because obviously you're voting to give authorization to someone to represent another party as opposed to the town, and especially since that individual is a former colleague, although I know he didn't sit on the board at the time that you've been sitting on the board, but he is a selectman, so there's always the concern that a former selectman is being granted some kind of waiver or permission. But essentially, again, this board is not making a decision with respect to the conflict of interest law. That's under the purview of the State Ethics Commission. This board is not involving itself in conflict of interest determinations. This board is simply deciding whether the matters are not substantially related or are separate matters, and therefore, almost as a business proposition, the gentleman can pursue a representation of another entity on a wholly separate matter. That doesn't constitute a conflict of interest for any individual member of the board. This is a matter under the rules that would be within the discretion of the board itself. And as Mr. Newhouse pointed out, there's even a question about whether that rule truly applies or not. But I think where it's been brought before you, and I think that it is something that is appropriate for you to decide, but that's wholly within your discretion. You are, as the chief executive body of this town, the employer of town council, of myself, of Mr. Deutsch, and formerly of Mr. Newhouse. And so I think it is wholly within the realm of the jurisdiction of this board to make this determination, and would not constitute either a conflict of interest or some other form of quote-unquote wrongdoing by this board to make this determination.
Thank you. So, Mr. Chairman, given the facts here presented tonight and reviewing the rulings from all the parties, I'm comfortable in my vote. I do look forward to asking Mr. Goodman some questions in the next portion of the meeting, but thank you, and I reserve my time to ask questions in the next presentation, if I may.
Thank you, Mr. Bendel. Are there any other questions? Okay. Hearing no more questions, is there a motion to provide informed consent to Mr. Newhouse so that he can represent GFI?
I'll make that motion, Mr. Chairman.
There's a motion by Mr. Loud, seconded by Mr. Bendel.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Before that vote is taken, I would recommend, as I indicated in my statement, that the board reserve the right to revisit this matter should other facts or information arise that may cause a concern as to matters that we're discussing tonight. So the decision will be made based upon the facts and issues as presented as of tonight, but should something arise in the future that would cause the board to wish to reconsider this matter, that the board reserve its rights in that regard.
Okay, should we add that in as an amendment to the motion?
Yes.
I'll make that as my main motion, sir.
Okay,
And I'll second the amended motion.
okay. So let's take a vote on the amendment first. All those in favor of the amendment signify by saying, raise your hands. There's 4 opposed?
I'm going to abstain.
Okay. So now to the main motion, which is to the motion to provide informed consent with the added amendment to it. Is there any discussion on that main motion? Okay. All those in favor? And there's 4
And I will
opposed?
abstain.
And abstain. Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I would just note that based upon a conversation that I had with Attorney Rich, in the event that the board decided to consent to this request, a letter was prepared by town council for the board's execution. You'll recall, in terms of the reference, that Rule 1.9 required not only a vote but written consent. So just for the record, I'll read the letter that was crafted by town council, again, in the event that the board took this vote. The Board of Selectmen is in receipt of your letter dated September 5, 2018, to Town Manager Jeffrey Hull, seeking informed consent from the board to your providing representation to a developer with respect to a proposed development at 51 Eames Street, in parentheses, the property, end parentheses. Your representation would extend to Eames Street Member LLC, GFI, with respect to its proposal to develop a warehousing facility at the property. The property is the site of a proposed development by New England Transrail LLC, NET, for which a petition for exemption has been filed with the Federal Surface Transportation Board, or STB. The town has actively opposed the NET project and the petition before the STB. You request informed consent from the Board of Selectmen as a former client, you're having served as town council to the town for the period from 2001 until June of 2003, pursuant to provisions of Rule 1.9 of the Rules of Professional Conduct, duties to former clients. The Board of Selectmen, at a properly posted meeting conducted on October 22nd, 2018, reviewed the matter of your proposed representation of GFI and your prior employment as town council. While the board did review issues related to the conflict of interest law and your former service to the town as a selectman, those issues are not addressed in this letter, as no action is required by the board in that regard. You have indicated that your proposed representation of GFI would not involve any petition previously or currently pending before the STB, that the GFI proposal is separate and apart from the NET project, and that you will not be involved in the NET project. Based upon the information provided by you to the Board of Selectmen and Town Council, it is reasonable to conclude that the GFI and NET matters are not the same, and your representation of GFI would not compromise the town's interests with respect to the NET proposal and petition. For the above stated reasons, the Board of Selectmen hereby gives its informed consent to your representation of GFI as outlined in your letter of September 5, 2018. The Board of Selectmen reserves its right to revisit the matter should facts or circumstances arise that would give reason to reconsider this determination.
Thank you. Okay, wait till that goes around, I guess. All right, our next appointment is at 7:30. We are running a bit behind now at this time. And it's with Michael J. Newhouse Esquire and Stephen Goodman, a manager of the Wilmington Woburn Intermodal LLC and GFI Partners for the purposes of a presentation of a warehouse proposal on 51 Eames Street, the Olin Superfund site. This time, I'm going to recuse myself. My brother, Michael, has consulted with GFI, and based on that knowledge and the advice from town council, at this time, I'll recuse myself and leave the room. I have also completed and filed with the town clerk's office a disclosure of appearance of conflict of interest as required by Mass General Laws, Chapter 268A, subsection 23B3. And that was on the advice of town council. So at this time, I'll turn the chairmanship over to Mr. McCoy. I'm going. You want to say that?
I'll just wait for Mr. Kira to vacate the room. That's what he stated earlier. All right, I was indicated earlier that Mr. Kira was going to abstain moments ago. To my surprise, I decided to abstain from the vote earlier relative to Mr. Newhouse. I didn't want to demonstrate any kind of bias at all, so I want to have a fair hearing. And right now, it's a 7:30. It is now 5 minutes of 8. Michael J. Newhouse Esquire and Stephen Goodman, manager, Wilmington Woburn Intermodal LLC and GFI Partners, relative to presentations of warehouse proposal for 51 Eames Street, Olin Superfund site, and Mr. Newhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, for the record, Michael Newhouse of 20 Middlesex Avenue. First of all, thank you for the board for your consideration. I'm pleased that I'm able to stay and that the team can stay and introduce themselves to the board and to the community and to give a little bit of information as to what their intentions and what their hopes are. At that, if I could just reintroduce Stephen Goodman, who's a principal of GFI Partners. He's also a manager of the entity known as Eames Street Member LLC, which is my client. We're joined this evening by Robert Bird, who's an LSP, and he's a hydrogeologist with EnviroTrack. Attorney Pamela Elko, who handles the environmental considerations that the team has spent considerable time looking at in the past several months, and Brian Poitras, who also is a principal with GFI Partners. So, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, it's our hope and expectation tonight really to do three things. One, to introduce the team and what the prospective project looks like and give some conceptual framework pursuant to which they'll be working in the coming months, hopefully. Also to explain or to answer any questions that the board or the audience might have with respect to the relationship between this team of developers and New England Transrail, which I don't have to remind the board or others in the audience is the petitioner that has recently moved to substitute a new entity for it, but NET is the driving force behind the petition that's pending before the STB. We're also here to acknowledge what some of the issues of concern are from the town's perspective, from the community's perspective, from the town administration's perspective, and frankly, from the potential developer's perspective. And lastly, we want to hear from the board and from the audience and others what the issues of concern are that we haven't already identified. So to that point, let me just quickly summarize the proposal. This development team is interested in designing and developing and permitting a general warehousing building at 51 Eames Street, which, as the chairman pointed out, is the site of the Olin Chemical site. The specifics of the warehousing facility haven't been nailed down. The size of the prospective facility hasn't been nailed down. These are the kinds of things that certainly we want to discuss with the town and which would be the subject of intensive due diligence before presenting plans either to the community development team at the administrative level, the planning board, the Conservation Commission, the Board of Appeals if necessary. And all of those things would happen after a more intensive zoning analysis and some real design work. With that said, the team is well aware of the history of the NET application that's pending with the STB. We are pleased to know that the town and the parties of record in that have agreed to stand still in terms of that application. As I'd mentioned previously, that is a matter that was a condition of my representation, and it's something that I didn't have to work particularly hard to convince Mr. Goodman and his team that it made sense to do. Quite frankly, they're in the business of warehousing, they're in the business of logistics, they're not in the business of owning or operating railway facilities, and it's their hope that through quite a bit of work on the local level, by complying with all local regulations, that the result of that would be a development that is acceptable to the town and all of its boards in compliance with all of the local regulations, which ultimately would pave the way for the withdrawal and the dismissal of the STB petition once and for all. Some of the issues that we're aware of are the fact that, by all accounts, the Olin Corporation hasn't moved expeditiously enough in terms of its remediation plans. We are well aware and sensitive to the fact that the town needs to be comfortable that that remediation plan is moving forward in a manner that is not only acceptable to EPA, but to the town. That's something that the applicant shares with the town and with EPA. We are aware that development of this site, it might make sense to do a phased development given some of the environmental challenges that exist there. We understand that there are very specific aspects of the remediation that will require a little bit longer period of time to analyze and to fully implement. And to that end, this team is interested and willing to discuss whatever kind of phasing might be the result of those concerns. We also want to say very plainly that while there is a financial arrangement, as there is with any potential acquisition, any real estate development, there's a financial arrangement and they have financial obligations that they need to meet. But this group is in no way, shape, or form in the railroad business. Now, that's not to say that they don't operate, manage, or own facilities where consumer goods and other goods are delivered to a facility by way of rail. Certainly that's the case, but they are not in the business of transporting solid waste, of transporting hazardous waste, of reloading, operating a reloading facility. Those are things that they're simply not in the business of doing. Ultimately, as the team goes through a design process and a permitting process, the team is committed to hearing out the town boards and the town administration, and as the concerns of the residents are voiced through those different processes, they're amenable to and capable of operating warehousing facilities that don't rely on any rail deliveries. But these are things that we know are issues. We know they're the kinds of things that the community in general are concerned about and will be paying attention to. And all of these things are all components of any development that they are more than willing to consider while they go through the process and, quite frankly, arrive at a design that not only meets their economic and business needs, but complies with the local rules and regulations and the conditions that folks such as the planning board would impose on any permits that they issue. So at that, certainly am ready and available, as the team is, to answer questions from the board about any of those issues or others that I may not have thought to raise, and be happy to do so tonight.
Before I go to the board, is there anybody from the team that want to speak to the board first before I open it to the membership for questions or comments? Or you rather just hear questions and comments?
I'd be happy to introduce myself,
Okay,
Mr.
that's
Chair.
what I think.
My name's Steve Goodman. I'm with a company called GFI Partners. I've been a landowner in Wilmington since 1997, and currently own over 500,000 square feet in the town of Wilmington. So, you know, we have a vested interest in your town. We've been, good taxpayers and been happy to be here as part of the community for over 20 years. So we're not coming into this town, without an enlightened interest in the future of your home where you live.
Do you want to tell the board and the audience that's here this evening what properties you own in Wilmington? You said about 500,000 square feet.
Sure. So I own 1 Burlington Ave since 1997, and that's the former Sweetheart Cup facility. at the train station. And also, we own a facility on Waltham, 5 Waltham. It's, I believe it's about 80,000 square foot facility. And the two of those buildings, are over 500,000 square feet, so that's where I got my numbers.
All right, thank you, Mr. Goodman. Anybody else from the team want to speak to the board, or should I just go to the board?
I think we're
I would just add one quick thing,
Sure.
Mr. Chairman. Just to be clear to the board and to the audience, we understand that there are many questions and many issues that need to be addressed, and we are not asking or expecting the board to give any kind of endorsement to a project based on a conceptual presentation. I just want to be clear that the purpose of being here is to present the team, present a concept, listen, hear what issues need to be addressed for, presumably when they actually put pen to paper and design a project.
All right, that being said, I'll turn to my right. Mr. Bendel, any question or comment? I'll
Sure.
just work my way down here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. Gentlemen, thank you for the presentation. Good evening to the folks from GFI. I just want to be cautious because I know from the advice of town council, I don't want to overstep my boundaries here as a member of the board. Certainly not, we're not part of the regulatory process here for you folks, but I can certainly imagine some of the questions that might come up as you work your way through the regulatory process if you do choose so. So if I may, I don't know if I should direct them at whoever, but I'll just allow them to your way, and you guys can handle them as best you can. Some of the questions I think you might anticipate from, say, the planning board or the Board of Appeals might be right off the bat, the warehouse itself. Perhaps you could give us a little more information about what you might use for the facility.
As far as what type of items might be coming and going out of
Yeah,
it?
storage?
Yeah, so it would be, what we would envision is a storage warehouse that would probably house, consumer goods going to market. So it's hard for me to tell you exactly what's going to be in there without knowing who that tenant would be. And as of this moment, we don't have a tenant, we don't have a building. But the idea is that the way the delivery model's changing in Massachusetts, in the country, because we as consumers are demanding that, we no longer go to the store, but the store has to come to us. So for you to get, or for the people of Wilmington in the surrounding areas to get their Amazon and their other deliveries, in a day or in an hour or in 2 days, whatever that is, there's more and more demand for, warehouse space closer to the population base. So what's in there, without knowing, is, the likely candidate is, consumer goods that are being delivered to the community.
Okay, another question or concern I might anticipate from the particular boards you might see your way through is with a lot of fears about this property, a lot of unknowns, would your group be amenable to perhaps eliminating the possibility of rail at that site?
Yeah, I mean, we get this 14-year, concern that's been going on. So we appreciate that. So we're not in the transworld business. We don't have any intention or desire to bring, gases or, other, flavorables or chemicals, by rail to this site. And we're happy to eliminate, each and every type of product that you or the town doesn't want. And to go as far as to say, no rail at this site. This site works for us without any rail. Our only caveat is that for certain consumer goods, for example, canned beverages or beer and wine or paper goods, using rail as a delivery, cuts down tremendously on potential truck traffic. So it's not always, rail isn't always a bad thing. But with that being said, if the town, makes it a, point of going forward that rail has to come off of this site, we're happy to, go forward without having rail on the site.
Yeah, I can envision that coming up. My next question, you mentioned possibility of a phased process, a phased project where multiple phases. Do you believe that this, whether it's a phased approach or a one-time build, would impede the cleanup process there at that site?
No, well, we couldn't do anything that would impede the cleanup. So our development would have to be part and parcel to the cleanup. One of our concerns is that this containment area is a issue of concern between EPA and Olin, and there's a lot of noise going on around what to do with that containment area. We see that, and we obviously don't want to get in the middle of that. So we wouldn't plan or intend to build on the containment area up until it's completely resolved with EPA. In the meantime, there's areas of the site that aren't as contentious, and that's where we would envision starting our phase one. But hopefully, or not hopefully, ultimately, the site's going to get resolved, and at that point, we would want to, fully utilize the potential of the site.
And my last question, if you do move forward with the regulatory process through the Planning Board, Conservation, and perhaps the Board of Appeals, is it my understanding from your presentation tonight and the pitch that you'll be making to those boards that this is an alternative way to stop NET from coming to this location, which is obviously a fear shared by most in this community?
Yes, this is the alternative, or an alternative.
To prevent NET from coming?
Exactly. As part of this development and the permitting of this site through the town, we would, I don't know the right word, dispose of or stop that STB process. It wouldn't be needed, it wouldn't be part of what we do.
Okay. And I appreciate your transparency, appreciate your group giving the presentation. I know that you don't have to be here in front of us to give this presentation to move forward, so I appreciate your willingness to be forthcoming with the information and the presentation of the facts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Selectman Bendel. Selectman Eaton.
I was wondering if you could speak to the relationship between Eames Street LLC and New England Transrail.
Sure. So New England Transrail was the entity that had, and I'm going to ask Brian to step in if I misspeak here.
I can help out with that, too.
But I'll give you from the cheap seats version. New England Transrail had the property under agreement with Olin and was going down a path, STB path. We became involved. We set up a new entity in which we are co-managers of the LLC, but we are the operating manager, and with the intent of pursuing a separate path with the town, not related to STB. With basically, our feeling is if we can do something different, it's very interesting to us, and that's why we're here. And the LLC or the structure was set up such that we have the controls we need, so that if, as we go forward and spend, money to develop this alternative route, we've got control so that we can sit here in front of the town and make representations to the town that we can deliver, and with the intent that if we can get from the permits we need, we know we can go and build a building.
Why involve New England Transrail at all?
Well, so the easier answer to that is they had the agreement with Olin, so we came in to their agreement, and we didn't have the right to, you know, there's an agreement in place with Olin. We didn't have the right. Olin couldn't make a deal with us because they already are under contract with NET. So we had to come in and enter into their contract in order to go and speak to Olin.
And if I could answer that another way, Mr. Eden, it said NET had a contractual right with respect to the prospective acquisition of the site. And given the 15 years that have gone by and the investment that it has made in this site, NET was not willing, and from a business standpoint, understandably so, was not willing to simply walk away from its investment with the hopes that that this entity would be able to develop it. So the answer to that situation was to develop a sole purpose LLC, of which the GFI group, through the Eames Street Member LLC, so the Eames Street Member LLC, Steve Goodman is the manager of that. And we commonly refer to that as GFI when we talk about the relationship, because that's the GFI folks who are the Eames Street Member LLC. Through a sole purpose limited liability company, New England Transrail LLC is also a member and has a financial interest in the outcome of that. But the LLC enables the GFI folks, as Eames Street Member LLC, to drive the bus on this proposal. So they are responsible for the management and prospective development of a warehouse, and that limited liability company structure enables NET to recapture a return on its investment from the last 15 years.
So, without New England Transrail here, it's kind of difficult. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of what ifs, but it certainly, to me, would seem as a possibility that GFI would be able to essentially buy out New England Transrail's interest or relationship with Olin, so that New England Transrail would no longer be a part of this. I guess I'm struggling because the involvement in New England Transrail, and based on what they've been trying to do for 15 years now, it gives me a lot of pause, because what I certainly don't want to see is, and I understand that the GFI or Eames Street LLC has responded saying that they can commit to the site, will not seek to become any type of railroad, rail carrier, rail transfer station, nor will it seek any special exemptions from the SDB. But then it goes on to continue to discuss rail cars. And my concern, I guess, is if this were to go through, if your proposal were to become reality, what's to prevent GFI and New England Transrail from then going back to the SDB and saying, well, we now have the warehouses and we have this facility that's operating, and we want the same thing that we're trying to get from 2003 to 2018?
I would answer that from two respects. First of all, conditions that the town deems suitable in consultation with council to provide conditions on any permitting which would effectuate that result. That's number one. Number two, if GFI is successful in going through this permitting venture, the STB petition is going to be dismissed with prejudice. And the two of those realities working simultaneously, which could include deed restrictions, it could include conditions of a special permit which would run with the land. All of these are mechanisms that we would look to use through the development process to ensure exactly what you're talking about, to avoid the prospect of what's caused you to raise your eyebrows and wonder how, you know, how can we be assured that by going through this process, ultimately, we don't end up back in front of the STB? And the answer to that is that at the end of this process, if permitting is successful, they will include conditions that will prevent that from happening, coupled with the withdrawal. And then, you know, alongside of that, you know, just to reiterate a point that Mr. Goodman had made earlier, on a conceptual level, we don't want to stand here and say there'll be no rail deliveries to that site, because we think it's premature from a number of different perspectives. But in the end, if going through this process, if in the end it makes sense for the town to have a development that doesn't have rail facilities, they're amenable to figuring that out. It's not like they, you know, so as we go through this process and through the permitting process, if in the town's judgment it wants to somehow condition rail deliveries or limit rail deliveries or just exclude them, that's something that the permitting is going to address. And the permitting is going to specifically acknowledge that none of the uses at that site will be available for redevelopment based on an exemption before the STB. I mean, there has to be a starting point somewhere, and that's why, from my perspective, and as I say, it was not a hard sell, but from my perspective, moving forward with a standstill agreement before we even came in this room, to me, is what enables GFI and assures the town that this company is willing to put its money where its mouth is. It's, you know, it has an arrangement through a limited liability company, but the folks that are in this room are driving the bus on this proposal, and this kind of a proposal is what they do. It's what they have experience in, and I guess in the end, nothing ventured, nothing gained. You know, if in the end, a development that is not palatable and permittable through the town regulations, if in the end, that's just not in the cards, the town certainly hasn't lost anything in putting a freeze on that process for an undetermined amount of time till we get through that. I mean, there's just, I think it's a nothing ventured, nothing gained, and nothing lost from the town standpoint.
All right, what access, if any, would Eames Street LLC be willing to provide for the purpose of remediation and groundwater testing and soil testing?
Yeah.
Pam Elko, I'm the outside environmental counsel. Because this is a superflood site and it's under the supervision of the EPA, once we have title to the site and for that by the start of the contract, we have an obligation to let EPA is contracted, always contracted on the site. We lose the liability protection that we will get as a bona fide prospective purchaser acquiring a superfund site if we don't let people on site do everything they need to do. So the statute contemplates that folks will buy superfund sites, but when you do that, once you've bought it, in order to, again, maintain that liability protection, you have to do certain things like provide access, like comply with activity and use limitations of the person site. So we've had multiple conversations with EPA, and we won't be doing anything on this site unless EPA is already involved and approves whatever we're going to do.
Selectman Bendel had asked a few questions about, Mr. Goodman, you had discussed a little bit about Phase 1 and Phase 2. Phase 1 being a larger, and I understand there's no blueprints that have been, everything seems a little bit fluid, but for right now, the conceptual design is around 400,000 square foot warehouse in the northwest corner of the property, which is more or less where the current building closest to Eames Street is, correct?
Yeah, on that side.
So,
Steve, do you want to put up
Actually,
that
we
poster
have-
board as
there's
a reference?
There's a reference board right here. So Ames Street
Yep.
here, so this is the containment area, so, we kind of envision the development, phase one of the development, on this side, and phase two, if and when, would be, into this area a little bit. But the majority, is from here over.
I'm sorry, where is phase two?
Well, I mean, this containment area is potentially a piece of the development
After remediation.
after remediation.
Okay.
But until that's resolved, the development would be, from this area forward.
So phase two is meant to happen after remediation, that's the difference between phase one and phase two.
And then all the wooded area to the south is generally, it's not, there's no planting on that stuff, that's pretty much off limits.
Kind of stays where it is.
All right, that's it for me.
Thank you, Selectman Lau.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The young lady just mentioned that phase two is for after remediation. I was wondering what the hurry is, because Mr. Newhouse mentioned the remediation process is taking forever. I would feel more comfortable if we knew what the remediation was before we even dug the first hole. Is that something you guys are willing to do, or?
Well, so,
That's my concern. My concern is that the remediation gets into battle, the town battles for years. And then we've got a 400 or 500,000 square foot warehouse in front of it that could be detrimental to the cleanup.
so I'll let the expert answer that.
I'm no expert
But
either, so
I- but
I'm
I
trying to
would I
learn.
will just tell you that from the developer's perspective, we can't do it, and we're not gonna put a building, in the middle of an area that we don't have permission to put a building there. And our development's gotta be part of the remediation solution, not,
Okay.
not add to it, but.
That answers that question. So then, I have so many questions, but very little time, no. What is the hurry to build such a large warehouse when on Main Street we have such a large warehouse available that's empty right now? Right down the street from your other one?
Yeah, so the old Expedix.
Yes.
Yeah, so,
All the Sweetheart Plastic before Expedix.
Exactly,
So-
yes, yeah, I'm very familiar with the building,
Yeah.
obviously. Or not obvious, but I am very familiar with the building.
Yeah.
They've been my neighbor, and I would say that, two things. One is, I wouldn't expect that building to be, vacant for a long time. It does have some challenges to it, but it's a great building and a great location. And two is that what we build here will be a much better building in a better location. We are, developers of warehouse facilities throughout New England. And we would not be here in front of you if we weren't fully believed that this is going to be a very successful
I'm
project.
just not a fan of not knowing what the remediation is gonna be, and I'm sure there's other people in the room and on TV land that have those same concerns. So that's my biggest concern is, we don't know what the cleanup is gonna be for this site. We've been fighting it for 15 years. It could be another 15 years before it's cleaned up. In Woburn, a neighboring town had a Superfund site. It took them 30 years before they put a building on any of that. And there's now a thriving businesses in some of those Superfund sites in Woburn, not far from this one. So that being said, I wanted that to be known, but I was on the Board of Appeals a few years ago when a cement company came in front of the Board of Appeals across the street from this one, and the Board of Appeals denied it. I believe it's still in litigation due to traffic. And I see on some of the questions that in your previous meetings with the town manager and others, 125 to 150 trucks is potential for this a typical 400, 500,000 square foot warehouse. Taking a right on Eames Street from your property and taking a right on to Woburn Street is dangerous for a tractor trailer. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. You cannot put more than a 30-foot tractor taking a right-hand turn onto Woburn Street without coming into incoming traffic. It's a fact, because it's not a good turn. What are your plans to fix that?
So.
Because
I-
150
no, I
trucks
appreciate
scare
that.
the heck out of me.
So.
And
we-
would anyone.
We are really here, right now, you know?
Yeah.
To just kind of talk in real general, and just to say, we know we have to deal with traffic, we know we have, there's issues.
It's a
Yeah,
big subject.
And we know we've got to go through this whole process, the formal process, not through some
Right.
exemption. We're here to go
Yep.
with the town, talk about traffic, talk about the building, talk about the uses, and go through the process. We know that there are going to have to be fixes, or we're going to have to come up with solutions to problems to make this work. But, you know, and so I'm not trying to get away around that question.
No, you're right, and maybe I shouldn't be asking that
it's-
question, but it's
I get
certainly
it.
gonna be brought up.
We totally get it,
And-
and we
and I
know we're
just
gonna
wanna
have to
let you
deal
know.
with it. We know we're gonna have to deal with it. But we believe that this site can be a valuable, you know, contribution to the town if it's redeveloped and brought into, you know, productive use.
Now, you say that, but my experience on the Board of Appeals, a cement company was not favorable because of the neighbors and the noise. So a warehouse is gonna make just as much, if not more, because of the vast amount of tractors that are gonna be coming in and out of there. Now, also you mentioned consumers, and I envisioned the Amazon truck coming in there at 10 o'clock, picking up a washing machine and leaving. And that could happen more than 125 times a day.
Well,
Well,
yeah, we don't know who's there, but.
Yeah, right.
And so I will tell you this, we're gonna have to do a very complicated and complex traffic study on this site for the proposed use. And we're gonna have to anticipate and figure out solutions to each and every one of those.
a lot of the questions were asked, and you guys have this from the town managers' meetings with you guys. So is it your proposal GFI would own the property at the end, if this process went forward?
Yes.
What does that do to Olin and/or its current situation with the?
Liabilities for the Superfund site?
Yeah.
I'll let the, Pam.
Right, so they don't go away. Olin will continue to be a responsible party for this site. It's an order that it's entered into with EPA. And that's just for the investigation part of this. The next phase is, once they do reach a remedy, which, again, the remedial, once EPA and Olin agree on a remedy, there'll be a second order that'll be issued to Olin. Responsible parties frequently are no longer the owners of the sites. Sometimes they were never the owner of a site that becomes a Superfund site. So from EPA's perspective, Olin is never getting off the hook right now. EPA considers Olin the responsible party for this site. In addition, our agreement, and again, as we were talking earlier, NET had the original agreement. The reason that we're working with NET is because we stepped into and are working with them under that existing agreement they had with Olin, but we amended that agreement. And under that agreement, Olin also remains responsible. We can't make anything worse. That would be bad if we did that. But they remain responsible even under our agreement with them. So even though they won't be the owner at some point, they will still continue to have the obligation to do the work. We have an obligation to give them access to do that work. We can't stop them from doing it. We have no interest in stopping them from doing that. But they will not, just by virtue of selling the real estate, they do not get out of their responsibility.
In addition, this is Brian Quickers, one of the things that, well, you asked a good question, why not wait till you have more clarity on how the site's going to get redeveloped or get cleaned up before you do any development? And the answer is, I think, is not merely intuitive, is that part of our development plan would call for us to actually go out and do additional testing of our own, you know, incorporate with EPA, and actually, you know, the process of developing this site with this warehouse would actually accelerate the cleanup of the site. We would do our own testing, our own characterization. In addition, we would go over and above what Olin's already doing. I think it's no secret that Olin hasn't moved as quickly as everyone would like. This actually forces their hand a little bit. It moves the ball quicker. And then having a building and capping and parking lots as part of a solution, you know, it makes things happen faster. So that's the reason why somebody who has a site, this would be excited to engage in a project like this because it speeds things up.
Well, thank you for that, because it was part of my next question. How do we know from where your proposal for phase one is not already contaminated?
And it may be, I mean, it is, but it's not contaminated like the containment area is contaminated, so, and.
So you do that, you dig that hole, you find out it's contaminated, the EPA gives you instructions on how to clean it?
Yes, there's already data there. We will take additional samples to make sure where we're constructing our building, we understand what's there. And there may be some soil that has to leave the site, but often buildings and/or parking lots can themselves serve as caps. So contamination, as long as nobody's coming into contact with it, it's not moving, and this is soil contamination we're talking about, not groundwater contamination. A building is a good way to remediate it because you don't end up having a lot of truck traffic in and out, removing dirt, where you're taking out dirt, bringing back in clean dirt. And it's how many industrial sites are remediated these days. So we won't build a building until we know what we can put there. In addition, Olin's agreement with us requires that we make sure that any building on this site has what's called a vapor mitigation system. So to the extent that there's contamination in groundwater that has the potential to come up out of the groundwater and get into any buildings that are constructed on site, all of those buildings need to be built with this vapor mitigation system. It works like a radon system does, that keeps things from getting into buildings. So any building we build on site, we have an obligation to make sure that we do that, as well as making sure that the soil that's under there is being managed appropriately.
All right, so one of my concerns on the statement you just made was it's contaminated on the soil, but that soil leads to our groundwater. So that, we've already got 5 wells shut down. We already have all kinds of issues there. So that's what this town and me and everyone on TV land and out there want to know, that when you pour that hot top or pour that cement pad, that it's clean and it will be clean forever. And there's no chance of you covering it with hot top now saying, because the EPA says, and I'm using layman terms because I'm not a lawyer, and there's 4 or 5 lawyers in the room and I'm not one. So I need to ask these questions, and I thank you for the time, Mr. Chairman.
Eddie, maybe not a bad thing, but go ahead.
But I just envision this 500,000 square feet of cement slab, and say there was 20 holes that had contamination. But the EPA says it's okay to cover it. How do we know that for a fact it's not gonna go down to our groundwater? That's my concern.
Yeah, so I think Bob Bird with EnviroTrack.
He's not a lawyer either.
I'm not a lawyer.
He's the technical guy.
Good. Technical guy. I think the issue is that soil contamination doesn't always end up as groundwater contamination. One, you have to have water infiltrating it to push it down. So if you're capped, you don't get that water infiltration.
Particularly with the building.
Yeah,
Okay.
that pushes the contamination into groundwater. And second, I think that the bulk of the groundwater contamination is what's called this DAPL, this heavy, dense.
Yep, no, I
aqueous
know what
liquid.
DAPL is.
It's in
Unfortunately,
pools.
I know what DAPL is.
And most of that's at the containment area and off-site. There's been some comment that there's going to be.
That's not true. It's not true.
So there's been some comments from EPA that they're going to do some additional investigation, and we're going to work with them to accommodate that. We think that in any design we have, we can accommodate anything EPA wants to do. Prior to putting the building on, we're proposing to do some additional testing to fill data gaps which EPA has recently identified as a way to accelerate this process. Rather than waiting for Olin to get around with it and fight with EPA, we propose to do some testing to try to move this forward, to make sure that we fully understand what's under the building before it's built.
Let me just say this.
Thank you.
I will eventually go to the audience, so you can hear everyone up front. I want you to still continue, Mr. Long.
I'm all set,
Good.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the time.
Ms. Eaton, you said I know, I'll go to Jeff next, but Ms. Eaton, you said you wanted to say something else. Go ahead, then I'll go to Jeff.
Thank you, Mr. McCoy. Just briefly dovetailing off of some of the questions from Mr. Loud. The focused feasibility study on source control is due at the end of next month, and the bedrock investigations work plan is due at the end of December of this year. Why are we having this conversation now? Because it's very difficult on this side of the table to evaluate your proposal, and one of your principles at GFI is acknowledging that it's very difficult for you to even know what's there because we don't know what the EPA's plan is going to be. I guess my concern is this even ripe? Should we be having this conversation now, or should we be having this conversation after we know what the finish line as defined by the EPA is gonna be?
Well, we feel that we're here in front, in front of the selectmen, really just to introduce ourselves and to tell you about what we want to do in concept. We know that there was concern, so we have two different things here. We have the use, which is, this proposed, what was the STB rail use, and then we have the environmental issues. So it's a very complicated site. But we need to start somewhere. Olin's objective, and I won't speak for Olin, but Olin's not in the development business, so time is their friend. So this thing lasts for 14, 20 years. It's no skin off their back. It's the longer before they have to actually do something. We are in the redevelopment business, so we don't want, time's not our friend. We want to go in there, we want to figure out what the problem is, and we want to solve the problem. And we're not here with answers yet. We just want to make sure that we have a level of buy-in that a warehouse here is potentially a better use than a transloaded rail yard. Once we nod in agreement on that potentially, then we can start talking about, okay, how are we going to figure out the environmental aspects of the site? Very complicated, obviously, but we look at it with a completely different set of eyes than Olin. We want to solve it. We want to figure out what we have to do to make it safe to build on. That's a different version of what to do than the corporate responsible party has in a different timeline.
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, just to add to that, first of all, from my own professional perspective, I needed to come to the Board of Selectmen before I could comfortably advocate and represent this client. So that's part of it. But the other part of it is, I am always of the mindset that if you're going to err on the side of having a public discussion sooner rather than later. And I take Mr. Eaton's comments, they're well received. If we wouldn't be in front of the planning board without a detailed site design, without a traffic study, without the imprimatur of the EPA in terms of proceeding with the remediation efforts, the analysis that goes into that, that's where we would, I think, rightfully be characterized as putting the cart before the horse and not being prepared. It's always a conundrum. You want to, if I went and advised this team of people for months and moved forward with meetings with the EPA, move forward for another year in terms of site evaluation and borings, et cetera, I think we'd be exposed to the argument that we never had come to the town and just talked about what our plans are. So, and then frankly, just from a strategic standpoint of partnering with the town, and I don't mean that in a financial sense certainly, but of coming to a meeting of the minds with the town as to what's an appropriate reuse of that facility when and if it's ready for redevelopment. It makes sense for us to be forthcoming and for people to be aware of what we're working on. It's in the end, hopefully, it should pave the way for for giving this team of people and as a development group some credibility in a situation that, we understand the folks who have been involved in this site for quite some time lack credibility with the Wilmington community. That's just a fact. So the comment is well received, but I guess it's a bit of a conundrum too when you advise a client. Let's get out to the public. Let's let them know what we're looking at and what we're studying and evaluating and working towards, and and hopefully be in a position of being able to understand the concerns and respond to them.
All right, thank you, Mr. Newhouse. Mr. Eaton, you're all set? Why don't I'll make some commentary now, then I'll go to the manager, then I will get to the audience. Just a moment ago, you said the containment area. If you can just point to it, isn't that the slurry wall where supposedly the contamination is? I would say not most of it, but amount of it is. Is that the slurry wall?
This thing here.
Now, has the slurry wall, is it leaking? Has it been compromised by any chance? I heard there was some leakage going through there. I could be wrong, but I asked that because I was told that.
Yeah,
Anyone
that's
has an answer to
something
that?
EPA is looking at. You know, the EPA has the documents, they've reviewed the documents, they provide 275 pages of comments, and they need to work that out with Olin. We can't really speak to that. We haven't done any or assessment on that regard.
But
Yeah.
EPA is very much interested in the answer to that question as well, and
And I
they're
think we're
forcing
all in
Olin
this
to.
room.
Yeah.
Right.
They're very
But-
interested in that question.
Right.
As are we.
Which
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
right, we want to know that too. And that's partly why, again, back to the phased approach, we don't want to get in the way of whatever might need to happen there.
I'd just like to continue. I'd just like to piggyback what Mr. Newell said earlier. I did prepare a statement I wanted to read, and I will make a few amendments towards the end, but pretty much what Mr. Newell said, and I do agree, that it seems like Olin, they haven't moved as quick as the town would like them to, and we want to see some type of remediation plan. We haven't seen that. And I've got a statement pretty much that says that, but I'd like to touch upon it because I've been here on this board for the past 15 years when this started, so I know the history, and I've been on the board close to 15 years prior to that. So I know a lot what's happened in that area, and I do want to touch upon some points that some folks did bring up. I just want to take, the position of the town hasn't changed. 2 meetings ago, Selectman Loud agreed with me when I said we shouldn't allow any development on the Olin site until Olin meets its obligations to the town and clean the environmental mess that it's there. Before we come up with another development for that site, we need to realize that the Olin site is a Superfund site. It perhaps one of the worst sites in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, maybe not even in the nation. EPA hasn't even finished its investigation of the Olin site. You can't have a remedial plan to clean the site until the EPA has finished its job. Would I love to see something else other than New England Transrail? Absolutely. I'm a realist. Something eventually will probably go there, but we really need to address the issue that's been haunting this community, for going over 2 decades now. The case of Olin, let's see, rather than New England Transrail, I do agree that we should have something else, but we need to start somewhere, and the site needs to be cleaned up. That's the bare minimum that Olin should do, and they have an obligation to its community. I mean, if they want to be good corporate partners and to the community, they need to do that, because I sat in this room and I remember many years ago, I forget the gentleman's name, he had a beautiful suit, good-looking guy, very sharp, and said, we're going to do everything. I forget the gentleman's name. Really haven't seen a lot, to be honest with you. A lot of talk, no action. You could understand our frustration, but, I hear what you're saying. After all its loss, if you take a look at it, we lost 5 out of the 9 drinking wells. Those wells were perhaps one of our greatest natural resources. At one time, we used to sell water to another community. That's not happening. When we need to use extra water, we have to be dependent on MWRA. Like I said, I'm a realist. Eventually, something will probably go there, but I just need to raise those points to make that statement. And you got to understand where we're coming from, that it is frustrating. And when we hear small things, and for example, and it's not on you folks, but there was whistleblowers on that site. And years ago, it's part of the record, the foundation and cement floor, they ripped up the cement floor and they put barrels in the ground and they covered it with cement. And that's how we found out, because there was whistleblowers. Without the whistleblowers, we wouldn't have known all that stuff. So it's serious issues out there. And I just raised those concerns right now, and I know I'd like to maybe talk a little bit later, but you got to understand where we're coming from here too as a community. All right, I'll go to the manager, then I will get to the audience. Thank you.
Just a comment and then a couple of questions. So clearly, one of the underlying concerns that I think we had raised early on when we first met was the town's ongoing position with regard to redevelopment has been that we believed it would be appropriate for EPA to at least have completed its evaluation of the site and developed alternatives, because the concern I think that we collectively have is that to the extent that the site is redeveloped sooner, it may preclude certain options. You know, if a building goes up in a certain spot, does that then make it more challenging, either from a cost perspective or logistically, to get to that spot and do whatever testing or remediation may happen? I think where the challenge lies here is that, as I understand it, you're looking, certainly from a business perspective, to be able to develop the property sooner than later. Do you have a timeline as to what you are looking at for engaging in that development? I mean, I presume there's a window of opportunity here, so to speak, that if this is something that comes to fruition, it needs to happen within a certain window of time, otherwise it becomes economically unviable.
Well, I mean, I think that there's an amount of time that, you know, ultimately could lead us to say that, but we know that we can't do anything on this site without EPA's permission and without a plan from us that complies with EPA's rules and regulations. So, you know, we're aware of Olin's last report and the disconnect between what Olin wrote and what EPA was expecting. And we are, we are working closely with EPA. We want to solve the problems that EPA sees so that we can develop, not, go down Olin's path of delay. So I don't think that what your concerns are any different than what my concerns are. We're going to invest a tremendous amount of money into a facility on this site. We're not going to do that on a piece of dirt that we might have to rip up later, or that's not going to be financeable or insurable or tenantable. So I don't think we are at odds over what needs to happen for a good, redevelopment concept plan to be successful here. There's a lot of challenges here, and one of them is how do we solve the soil issues where we want to put our building. We see a good designed building and facility here as part of the solution to the problem, not something that's going to, exasperate it or make it worse.
I mean, so what the concerns that you voiced, we've met with EPA. EPA has said the exact same thing. They said, you can't build here, there, anywhere, especially here, but anywhere until, we've gotten further down and further characterized what's here, what needs to happen. So, the good, I should make the EPA is saying the same thing you are, which we agree with. So that's why we offered to, help to accelerate by doing, filling in the data gaps, adding to whatever owns, and we're going to do our own testing, add to it. We want to just try to help to get to the solution faster by spending our own time and money, by doing more testing and more investigation, because nothing's going to happen until what you said happens, until the plan is worked out and the site is better characterized. And we just want to help. We're willing to spend time and money to help accelerate that. And EPA is saying the same thing you are, and it's the right answer. We wouldn't.
Well, if I could just jump in there just a quick second. So for a stretch of time, that clearly seemed to be the case, that the town and EPA were operating in unison and that we had that same position. I think the thing that surprised us within the last year and a half or so was when EPA diverged from that path, and there was a discussion, I guess, at some level with representatives from NET and EPA, in which EPA said, we don't necessarily have a problem if the NET proposal goes forward, as long as we can do what we're tasked with doing. That ultimately part of their modus operandi, that is EPA's, is to not only remediate the site, but to make it viable for another use. So for the longest period of time, we did seem to be have the same opinion that nothing can happen here until the site is fully characterized and the options for resolution laid out. but then EPA seemed to retract from, take a step back from that position. So I guess that, I'm not sure, you know, I'm presuming that position is still EPA's position, but.
Well, I think it's important to keep in mind that there's sort of.
Speak up, please.
I'm sorry. I usually don't get accused of not being loud enough, so I'm sorry. But I think it's important to keep in mind that there's the larger picture of remediation of the Superfund site, which includes this parcel, the off-site impacts, and the groundwater that's been impacted as a result of that. So that's the global. Everything's been investigated, and now we have a plan, the ROD, you know, that's the solution for the entire site. And obviously that hasn't happened yet. But I think that it's important to realize that there can be interim opportunities that portions of sites, and this is not the only Superfund site or MCP site where these things happen, where you can have portions of the site that you can adequately understand and ensure, and then you can either complete your remediation or remediate and redevelop on a portion of the site, and that doesn't get in the way of the rest of it. And in fact, what it does is it takes at least a part of the property and puts it back into protective reuse for the community. So I don't think anyone is disagreeing with the concept that we need to understand what's happening out there. And then at the end of the day, EPA has to come up with how it thinks the site needs to be remediated, and it needs to issue the ROD, and then Olin's going to have to enter into the consent decree for the remedial design to implement that ROD. But if there's a portion of the site where the soil conditions can be well understood, building a building will address those soil conditions by capping it and preventing any potential for leaching of contaminants into the groundwater, or those particular contaminants don't leach anyway, then it may make sense to do that, because then again, you're not stuck with waiting for the whole thing to get finished and then develop it. You know, people are smarter now about how we remediate sites. You know, back, we used to wait until everything was cleaned up and then we put something on top of it. Well, now we realize that sometimes the development, to Brian's earlier point, can be part of the remediation. That's not going to be true for a lot of this site, but it can be true for a portion of the site. And I think Steve's point is, we're not going to build a building that we're going to have to undo or drill through the floor of. That doesn't help us. We need to fully understand what's going to be in the area where we put our building. But if we do, and EPA gets comfortable with that, that can be an interim measure that allows for a portion of the site to be, again, back into productive reuse and still allows access to the rest of the site so that the rest of the remediation can continue. So I don't think those positions are inconsistent, but I think it's important to make sure that all of the things that have to happen, that interim measure is done appropriately and under EPA oversight happens, so that EPA is comfortable, you're comfortable, we're comfortable, because these guys are investing a lot of money in, you know, in this team and in figuring out how to get this done. But it takes asking those questions, and that's important, but I think it is doable if you're thoughtful about how you go about doing it.
Do you have anything else?
Yeah, actually, I know this is at a general concept stage, but has there been any conversation with EPA or any thought given to the whole stormwater issue? So if I understand the proposal correctly, a large segment of this property will be either warehouse or paved. We clearly, stormwater runoff can't be filtered onto the site because of the circumstances of that would lead to. So what's the general thought, or has EPA even, have you had any conversations with EPA about how stormwater would be handled?
Not yet.
Well, I would say that we know it's an issue. We know that we're going to have to contain stormwater and clean it and make sure that whatever's being let go is not contaminated. But what?
I don't think we've had any detailed discussion.
The guys from the other engineering firm, the wetlands guys. So, I mean, it's been thought of. I mean, we've had enough conversation from our perspective to know that it's doable. We don't have designs in place yet.
Right.
It's one of the questions that we ask to make sure that, you know, we can actually build something here.
Okay. And then my final question, I noted in your response on question 7 to our question 7 about traffic, you'd engaged a traffic engineer to conduct some traffic study. Has there been any preliminary information back on that?
I think we got that back yet.
The footprint's changed. We kind of put that.
Yeah, well, until we knew, like, you know, it's, I think they've done counts, right? But they don't have a design to lay, they've done existing counts, but we don't have a design to lay the impacts against yet.
Because this will include not only, we need to be mindful of the truck traffic, but also the employee traffic.
Yeah.
If I recall, it was something in the order of 300, perhaps 350 employees maybe at that site.
Yeah, depending on how big and like over phase 1 and phase 2, but I would assume that if, you know, at full build out here, you would expect to have, you know, 200-300 plus employees, you know, jobs created here.
Okay.
All set, Jeff?
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I had one follow-up question. You've talked about you're gonna do some testing. Is it possible that the town's environmentalist could be part of that, or at least copied on the reports?
Yeah, of
And
course.
along with the selectmen?
Yeah, it'll go through EPA, there'll be a whole proposal, review process, and they will fully buy into anything that we're gonna do, and it'll be available for public.
Thank you.
Review.
Thank you,
All
Mr.
set,
Chairman.
Ed? All right, I'll go to the audience. If you want to just say who you are, where you live. So right now, we'll go to the audience. Anybody in the audience has anything to say? Mr. Fasula, just state your name and where your address for the
Fasula,
record.
28 Marjorie Road. I just got a question, and I've got a comment for you, Mr. Chairman. We got Mr. Deutsch here. I'm curious what he thinks about the whole, will it hamper the town's position anywhere if this continues to be, to be entertained?
Dan, you want to answer that?
Well, I would say, first of all, that the attention that's so far been given to this conceptual project, and even permitting processes, if they're pursued, will not, at least directly, impact the EPA's ongoing review of the environmental issues and of the reports and data and concerns with the completeness of the reports and data of Olin's environmental consultants. That's very much an ongoing process. So whatever may happen or not with respect to the permitting of a project for the site, the EPA, the development of a remedial investigation, completion of the remedial investigation, development of a feasibility study, and ultimately a record of decision, which is the ROD that Ms. Elkin, Attorney Elkin referred to, that process has to proceed and be completed. The EPA will have to pass to some extent on the development, the pace of development of any plan, even if it were approved by town boards, because the development would have to occur on the site that is, over which the EPA has jurisdiction. So, to the extent that the concerns coincide entirely with the EPA review process, I think that that's instructive. Now, to the extent that the town has its own concerns, that those concerns aren't necessarily addressed fully by what the EPA does or requires or doesn't require. And I think that's part of the reason for this discussion this evening, is to anticipate some of the concerns that might arise down the road.
So would you look on this negatively or in favor for the town? I mean, we fought this and spent thousands on thousands of dollars. I mean, is this a positive for us to be looking at right now?
It's not really my role as an attorney to advise the town or provide any non-legal perspective or opinion about the advisability or the value to the town of a project like this, which is clearly still very much in a concept phase in any event. But it does present the possibility of an alternative to a project of the type that the town has very much been opposing before the Surface Transportation Board, and that is the rail-based commodities transloading facility that New England Transrail has been pursuing in recent years.
All set. So what else? Mrs. Sullivan?
Suzanne Sullivan, 60 Lawrence Street. I just want to remind the board and everybody here that the reason this is a Superfund site is not because of 21E issues and soil contamination on the site. This is a Superfund site because of the groundwater contamination. The groundwater contamination that shut down our wells, the groundwater contamination that some people think may have been responsible for childhood cancer in our town, that we still don't have an answer to yet. And that's why this is a Superfund site. I just want to make that very clear. I also want to know if the board is aware of the 7/25 letter that the EPA sent to Olin, which is called a notice of disapproval. And they tell Olin in this letter that they disapprove of their draft remedial investigation report, operable unit 3, which is the groundwater part of the site, the draft baseline human health risk assessment, operable unit 3, which is also the groundwater part of the site, draft operable unit 1 and operable unit 2 in the feasibility study, and that's both the soil and the surface water of the site, the draft operable unit 3 feasibility study, which is also the groundwater of the site, contaminated area bedrock boring results, which is the containment area. They don't even agree with the results of that. And the revised rock matrix sampling work that was done on July 6, 2018, which is when they took borings out of bedrock to see if there was contamination in the bedrock. So that's a notice of disapproval of all those reports after 12, 15 years of working on this site. I've been involved in this site for 20 years. Olin has not done what they're supposed to do. This is premature to be coming in here to this town without Olin meeting their obligation on the Superfund. We do not have a remedial plan. I sit here and listen to people be disingenuous talking about, oh, well, we'll do testing, we'll do all this and that. Olin is filing a technical waiver request so that they don't have to clean up. They do not want to have to clean up this site. So to have these people come in here and say, oh, well, we'll do some cleanup and we'll do testing. Really? I find that so disingenuous. I mean, I want to see this site get to the point where it's reusable. Okay, that's one of the purposes of Superfund. I want to see that happen. But I want a remedial plan first. If you guys want to come in here and develop that property, then make Olin do the work that they're supposed to do, and New England Transrail. And if you really want to do the right thing for the town, then get rid of New England Transrail. Get rid of the Surface Transportation Board now. Not holding a gun to the community and saying, well, we're going to go to the planning board, we could go to Board of Appeals, we could do this, we could do that. But hey, if you guys don't really comply, we always have the other option. That's holding a gun to our head. I see it. I think people in TV land see it too. I think it's disgraceful. I don't like it. I want to see a plan for the town to start cleaning up our aquifer. I don't think anything is acceptable until we have a plan. Is that too much to ask for? A remedial plan? I'm not even saying remediation. When I hear people talking about, well, we'll start, we'll do remediation and then we'll go to phase 2. What? There's millions and millions and millions of gallons of contamination in the ground there. And it's not just the DAPL. There's a diffuse layer of contamination too that's spread all the way up to Hillside Way. And they haven't even decided where the actual footprint of the site is yet because it's spreading. Okay? So I don't want to hear it's just the DAPL. It's spreading all over. We don't even know the limits of it. And meanwhile, Olin is dragging their feet and not cleaning it up. They don't even have a plan. They just disapproved all the plans we've been working on for 12 years. It's premature. I welcome you guys to come in when we have a plan. I don't think it's too much to ask for, to have a remediation plan for our town, for the site that shut down our water supply, and for the site that people think may have caused cancer in our kids. When you work on that, don't come here. We're not the things holding stuff up. Go to Olin. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you. Jeff, did you want to respond
Yeah,
to that?
I was
Because you
just
said,
gonna-
was there a letter sent to the town?
Yes,
Well, it
yes.
should- You guys should have gotten it. So it was dated September 25th. It was sent out to Geo. It was sent out to everybody. All these plans, a notice of disapproval.
Yes, there was a letter of September 25th that was sent out. It was forwarded to our environmental consultant and the staff here at the town. My point was going to be that the long and the short of it is that we can either continue to spend time, money, and resources to fight the STB, the NET petition with STB, or we can at least consider, and I say consider, not commit to yet, but at least consider alternative options. I mean, that NET proposal marches forward, with the exception of the fact that now, because of this at least opportunity to hear about this proposal, we have that frozen in time. I understand the desire to have the remedial options out there before anything be considered, but I think we need to also be mindful of the fact that if we just say hell no, that we may be in a position at some point down the line, whether it's 3 months from now or 6 months from now, when STB makes their decision, that we're going to be saying, geez, maybe we should have at least considered another alternative. That's the point that I would make, and why I even had these conversations to begin with. I understand that we have taken the position, as I noted earlier, that we want to get to the point of completing the investigation and understanding the options, but we also have this NET-STB case hanging over our heads. And to consider options that may make that go away, I don't think is, should be out of the question.
Mr. Chairman, may I?
Go Susan one more time, yep, go ahead.
I understand what you're saying, Jeff. I mean, that's always been our position, but this is the concern, okay? The site gets developed, even if it's phase one part of the site, and then nothing happens. I mean, we still can't get Olin to do what they're supposed to do. So now we're gonna allow a development of that site. Most Superfund sites, this is unprecedented, most Superfund sites, they have a ROD before there's a development, okay? That's how it goes. This is not, it's the process that is usually takes place with the Superfund site. And there's reasons for that, because the public's supposed to be involved in the development of that site. You get a ROD, there's a record of decision, I'm sorry, I used ROD, a record of decision where the perpetrators have to clean up the site and what the development will be, and all that is inside the record of decision, and the town is involved in that. This process here is ludicrous. This isn't the way it's supposed to go, and have people come in and hold a gun to the town's head and say, hey, we could do it like this way, or we're gonna have the Surface Transportation Board in, and that's what this is. This is a gun being held to our head. Or, what's our choice? It's like a catch-22. If we let them come in and develop the site as a phase one or some part of the site, and then Olin, is more able to walk away and never do their responsibility. They're already trying to walk away. And I don't want to hear, well, they have to clean it up. That's not true. They're going for a technical waiver so that they don't have to clean it up. They don't have to clean up the aquifer. That's what Olin is doing to this town. And we're gonna bend over backwards to allow them to come in and develop it?
I'm in agreement that Olin is irresponsible here. I think it's unfortunate to essentially assassinate people who are simply saying, look, we have another option for you to consider. I mean, at the end of the day,
To develop Olin's property, it's Olin's property. Why, they're still here to develop Olin's property.
Susan, just let him finish, I'll go back to you.
Olin is a company that is sticking it to this town, along with New England Transrail. They've partnered with New England Transrail. I don't understand why people are so comfortable with that perspective, like we should trust that. I don't trust them. I'm sorry, it's no insult to anybody, it's frustration, but I don't trust it. They're still partnered. I just went to the Surface Transportation website today, and they filed a new petition with the Surface Transportation Board as GFI/NET.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question we can agree that Olin is the bad guy here, and I will say that we were also very skeptical of the fact that NET is still part of this operation. Certainly, it would be provide some measure of relief if NET was not part of this new outfit going forward. But you know, I think. Are they looking to make money? Sure. I mean, that's what any developer is going to do with this site. This site will be developed at a point in time. You know, whether we decide to roll the dice and hope that the STB will make the right decision, or whether we want to at least entertain this proposal is all I'm suggesting.
All right, thank you. Anybody else? Mr. West, and then somebody in the back. Mr. West?
Frank West, 2 Birchwood Road. Again, I was on the Board of Selectmen from 2002 to 2005, been listening to years worth of Olin's gonna. Now, if what I'm hearing now is Olin's gonna sell the property, what I would strongly suggest, if possible, if we could hold them at a bond, you know, that way they're, you know, at least they're financially responsible, because right now, whatever they're doing, theoretically, at the end of the day, somebody could take the property. You know, be it the town, DEP, EPA, somebody could say, you know what, we're done, you're not holding the promises, maybe they could take the property. So if the property is being sold to these gentlemen, this GFI Corp, Limited Liability Corporation, you know, maybe the town or you guys or somebody should hold a bond with Olin to ensure that this stuff, that whatever's being done is being done. And quite truthfully, there should be a bond with you folks if you're making promises to do certain stuff, and if you don't do it, you know, again, I don't know who the holder of the bond would be it the town, DEP, EPA, but again, you want to hold people responsible, you hold their purse, you hold their pocketbook. And the only other thing that I'll say is that if what's being talked about is to cap 500,000 square feet for a warehouse and warehouse parking, whatever, the stuff's still there. So I get it that it may or may not have leached into the water field, into the well fields, or to the groundwater rather, excuse me. Can anybody guarantee that? I don't think so. I think that, you know, it's probably, you know, the easiest thing. Hey, look, you know, we cover it over. Theoretically, it won't rain inside the warehouse so that nothing will go through. But again, as Mr. Hull said, you're going to have, you know, probably, and you sir said probably you'd had maybe 300 odd employees bringing cars in, a couple of hundred trucks, you know, 100 trucks, couple of hundred trucks, diesel fuel, things going into the to the drains. Are we making it better or are we making it worse? I don't know. I mean, I think, like I said, I think we need to hold Olin to the fire to make it well. And if you guys are going to be part of the solution, you know, respectfully, we need to hold you guys to the fire as well. So, and I think the way to do it, or one way to do it, is a sizable bond, especially if Olin sells the property and they're going to sell it for millions of dollars. I don't know what type of agreement you'd have, but at least you'd have the bond to at least have something tangible. You guys don't fix it, we'll take the bond, we'll take care of it.
All right, thank you, Mr. There's a hand in the back I didn't see.
Gary DePalma, 46 Swain Road. I've been following this. I moved into Wilmington approximately 1991, mid-1991, and been following this continuously. There's one thing I have not heard from anybody, and I mean anybody. Tell them to fix it, and then you can build. Simple as that. There's ways to have it done. Following these, our legal counsel, the town's legal counsel knows, everyone knows is sitting here. Fix it. As soon as it's fixed, you can do what you want. Not do what you want, but you can build. Fix it and build. That's all we can ask for.
I hear what you're saying. I've got to admit, Mr. Lauder myself, a couple meetings ago, that's what he said, so just want to let you know that. Thank you, Mr. DePalma. Anybody else in the audience? Nobody else at all? Any other members here? Anything? I'll let you have last remarks, whatever you want to say.
Nothing substantive, Mr. Chairman, just to thank you and the board and the folks who've offered comments. Frankly, none of those comments surprise us. We've talked about these things. We understand that if this team moves forward, those are the kinds of things that we need to contend with and to address. And we just look forward to the opportunity to addressing it really with the town. And certainly EPA is a player at the table and a most important one, but so is the town, and that's to me is the bright side of this alternative.
All right, thank you for coming, and we'll see you again, maybe.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay. Why don't you want to get Mr. Carey before he finishes the Halloween candy? All right?
Yeah,
All right, thanks, yeah. Oh, yeah, no, we're going to take a break. Thank you.
Short recess.
Yeah, short recess, thank you.
Okay, we're back. Mr. McCoy, thank you for chairing that portion of the meeting. Appreciate that very much.
Thank you.
And now we're on to communications.
First under communication is a letter from Director of Veteran Services, Lou Samaglia, requesting an appointment with the board, perhaps at your November meeting, to speak about a chair, a new POW MIA chair that is graciously being donated to the town by Shawshene Tech. The students there put this together. They've done this for a number of communities. And there's been some discussion now about the placement of the chair. I think the plan is to place it here in the meeting room, and Mr. Smaglia would like to have an opportunity to speak with the board about that. Next is also a letter from Mr. Smaglia, Veteran Services. I'll just read this one. That's directed to the chair. The Department of Veteran Services would like to request permission to hold our Veterans Day ceremonies on Wilmington Common on Sunday, November 11th, 2018, at 11 a.m. The Wilmington Department of Veteran Services invites you and the Board of Selectmen to participate in remembering and honoring of all of our past and present veterans on Sunday, November 11th. As always, we will assemble at the 4th of July parking lot at 10:45, proceed to the town common for this year's Veterans Day ceremonies at 11 a.m. This year's ceremony will begin with the ringing of the ceremonial bell 21 times as a salute and remembrance of those who served and sacrificed during World War I on its 100th year anniversary. We'd also like to request permission to, quote, light the common green, end quote, for the month of November to honor all of our veterans. We would like to thank you and the board for your past support of our department's events and your continued support for all the veterans in our town. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me. Next is memorandum from Valerie Gingrich, the planning director. This is in response to a letter that the board received from Mr. Fasulo regarding the detox center and raising questions about the waiver process that the planning board uses. I won't go into the full scope of the memo, but essentially Valerie notes that the subdivision control regulations were established in 1978, have not been revised, 1975, have not been revised since 1975. Clearly the standards that were in place at that time and the way that things were done back 43 years ago have changed. One of the more salient changes is the road widths. If you look at some of the subdivisions that were done in the 60s and 70s, the road widths are much wider than they are today. As a consequence, Valerie and her staff, in addition to Public Works, are working on essentially a rewrite of the subdivision control regulations. One of the provisions that specifically came up in this case has to do with the requirements for a so-called minor street, which the road that is proposed to access this detox center is considered. A minor street is deemed a street in which, in the opinion of the board, is being used or will be used primarily to provide access to abutting lots and which will not be used for through traffic. There's certain requirements in terms of road widths, and there's an inconsistency with respect to the road width in the design versus construction. And so in this case, the planning board felt it appropriate to grant a waiver to not require the developer to have a 60-foot right-of-way, instead to be consistent with what is proposed or what is part of their regulations currently, which is a 50-foot right-of-way. She also goes on to note that granting of waivers is not unusual because of the age of the subdivision control bylaws, subdivision control regulations. There are oftentimes instances where the planning board believes it's in the best interest of the town to grant a waiver. So that is the response to that question.
Was a letter sent to Mr. Fasulo in that regard?
I have not sent a letter to Mr. Fasulo, no.
Okay. Will you be sending one in regards to
Yes, yes. Next is a memo to the board from me with regard to economic development. You'll recall that there was a meeting with Secretary of Housing and Economic Development Jay Ash, Senator Tarr, and Representative Gordon some weeks ago. Some of the points that I thought were important that came out of that discussion are noted here in my memo. Establishing relationships with the property owners, identifying property owners who we believe may be interested in working with us for development purposes, focusing on 3 to 5 potential projects, maintaining an effective permitting process, building from within, so to speak, and looking to existing businesses to perhaps expand or drawing upon the businesses that support them, and also establishing a single point of contact. So I go on to note that clearly one of the issues that is at the forefront right now is completing the market study, and the expectation is that representatives from the Donahue Institute who have been involved will be looking to have them on the agenda at an upcoming meeting. That is one issue that is in the works. Also looking to identify, and we will be doing this going forward, look to identify some of the concerns and desires of residents. I think part of what Secretary Ash talked about is trying to get a better sense of what the community wants, knowing who we are. You know, there's been certainly a lot of discussion about promoting economic development, which is certainly something we need to focus on. We also need to get some sense from the public about their concerns over development, because as we all know, viable, productive economic development is going to have certain consequences in terms of increased traffic and other potential impacts. So we need to be able to strike a balance there. So the memo goes on to talk about also the prospect of at least gathering information from Middlesex 3. I'll be meeting or having a conference call with the director of the Middlesex 3 this week, I believe Wednesday. Valerie Gingrich will participate. The Middlesex 3, as you know, is communities that border Route 3, and their primary focus is economic development along Route 3. We can certainly learn from what they are doing. My sense, quite frankly, is that Wilmington's orientation is really more 93, 95 as opposed to Route 3. And we have the North Suburban Planning Council which we're a part of. It's part of the MAPC subgroup. There's 9 communities involved. They are doing some work right now to try to really designate those 9 communities as a particular commerce district, if you will. I would say, from what I understand, they're not quite as far along as Middlesex 3 is, but I would expect that we will continue to work with this group, and I think that's where we really want to focus a lot of our attention. And that is the memo on economic development.
Yes.
Just briefly on that, I recognize that Mr. Hull's memo goes on to say that an increase in staffing for the purpose of economic development is not in the near future. I do think that some of the points that came out of the conversation, the discussion that we had with Secretary Ash, Senator Tarr, and Representative Gordon would not require an economic development coordinator. I think we could have a committee that was made up of residents that could certainly, I think, actually be best suited to identifying the types of developments that the community would be looking to do, and identifying the areas of town that we might want to target. I do think that it does make sense to at least solicit participation from both the Planning Board and the Zoning Board of Appeals, because they tend to notice trends. At least I'm assuming that they would notice trends over the types of issues and that prospective developments have run into, whether those are positive or negative. But I do think that we've got 23,000 people in this town. A lot of them are pretty smart, and a lot of them have a lot to offer and are willing to participate. So I do think that increasing the community's involvement in shaping the direction of the town is a good thing, and I would hope that it not being in the budget in the near future to hire an economic development coordinator was not an obstacle that we could not overcome in being proactive about responsibly trying to improve our local economy.
Mr. Chairman, if I could.
Yes.
I want to thank you, Mr. Eaton. I totally agree. As I've said on the record before, that I believe we should have some sort of committee put together that has a combination of obviously town employees who are the experts that we lean on, but also residents, as Mr. Eaton mentioned. The only thing I would add is the suggestion, something similar that we did, I believe it was a year or two back now, with the Butters Row Bridge, where we had a community forum. We started with a community forum where residents came and voiced their ideas, concerns, such as I wonder if that might be something that might be a good place to start before the forming of a committee, which I also agree that would be beneficial to the community. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would just note that with respect to a committee, I think that the keys, from my perspective, are, first of all, what is the end product of their efforts, so to speak. I think there needs to be clarity as to what their mission is and what will be done at the end of the day. When we put together the facilities committee, for example, that was an ad hoc committee. It met for a specific time. It completed, in conjunction with the firm that was brought on, a review of our facilities, and ultimately they were the folks, certainly they were all public meetings, but they were the folks that commented on that particular facilities plan. So I think it's key that any committee have a mission, a purpose, and an end product. I also think there needs to be consideration given to who's going to staff this committee, because the committee, understandably, is going to be a committee of volunteers. Somebody's going to have to take minutes to these meetings. Somebody's going to have to do the day-to-day follow-up that comes out of those meetings. So I think those are things that need to be considered in terms of a committee.
Mr. Chairman, if I could respond to that?
Yes.
To Mr. Eaton's point, we do have 23,000 of the finest people in the Commonwealth. I think we could definitely find somebody to keep minutes of a volunteer meeting. Also, I do recognize that certainly there should be a goal in mind for this committee, and certainly perhaps it's a discussion that we have at a future date. What is that goal? But I don't see the harm in a group of people getting together, tossing around some constructive ideas that can be then recommended to the governing bodies, whether it's the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Appeals, the Planning Board, or eventually town meeting. Again, if the end goal is just simply a memo of folks with ideas going forward, I don't think that's a negative. So I certainly am not asking them to put together a plan and then put some shovels in the ground. I think we're just looking for some consensus from folks, and I think a lot of people have good ideas out there, and they ought to be heard.
Just briefly, I think, to address, I guess, best answer some of the questions that you raised, Mr. Hall, I think Mr. Bendel's idea of a community forum actually might be a great place to crowdsource that. I've done some amount of looking into other economic development committees. The one in Maynard, the structure and I think the organization of it strikes me as particularly impressive. I'll just briefly, as food for thought, read their mission statement. The Economic Development Committee is intended to provide input and advice on the town's economic development opportunities, such as ways to support existing businesses, creation of new employment opportunities, and the attraction of new investment. I think there should be a discussion. I think a community forum, Mr. Bendel's idea, is an excellent way, because we've got plenty of human resources in this community that want to see a more proactive approach towards improving our local economy. And I think getting a bunch of people together and inviting people to share their ideas is really the best way to firm up a direction.
So one of the things we can certainly do is if there's a committee, if the desire is to have a committee, use that as a forum to, I guess, to gather opinions from the public about what people are looking for, where we should be focusing our efforts, and, you know, challenging taking on the question of what is an appropriate balance between more economic development and the prospect of the consequences that come from that. I mean, that is really the challenge that we deal with. You know, people, we hear it regularly, that are frustrated with the traffic in various places in town. Vibrant businesses are going to generate traffic. You know, that's not a bad thing, but there needs to be an expectation that if we generate more business, one of the consequences of that is, if it's a healthy business, we're going to generate more traffic. So, yeah, we can certainly, if it's the desire of the board to have a committee, I can report back to the board with a proposed format for that and proposed mission. I would suggest that, at least out of the gate, that that a committee be an ad hoc committee that is time-specific, with a mission being to go out to the community, whether it's talking to people that they know that are in business, talking to the chamber, talking to other residents, and, you know, we can put together perhaps a series of questions, standard questions that would be done through this committee that they can then use to try to develop some information. Part of that could be this forum that's being talked about, where people have an opportunity to come in and offer their opinion.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just respond.
Sure.
Thank you. Yeah, no doubt about it. We all have heard concerns about traffic. We probably all at this table in this room have concerns about traffic in this community. I think we're united on that, no question. But we also hear from folks that they're tired of seeing empty businesses along Route 38 and other portions of our community. So if there's a way that we can fill those businesses that are already there, then we ought to look at that, because there's an opportunity to generate some commercial tax base that then takes the burden off the residents. So if we can explore those options by getting together and having some constructive conversations with folks, I don't see the harm.
Agreed.
Okay. Thank you.
Next is a memo from me to the board, just noting the plan for a survey to go out with respect to the annual town meeting date. You'll recall that there was discussion or comment made at a previous Board of Selectmen's meeting suggesting that The current arrangement for the annual town meeting, it being on a Saturday, is inconvenient, raises a host of issues, and the suggestion that the board should consider an article at town meeting to revise the inhabitant bylaws with respect to the date of an annual town meeting. The intent here is to simply get a sense from the public as to what people's preferences are, concerns, and once that information is gathered, we'll report back to the board.
Mr. Chairman, Jeff, if I can just touch upon this, I apologize if this came out 2 weeks ago and I didn't respond, but I want to let you know something. I remember we talked about this. I was on the inhabitants bylaws appointed by the Board of Selectmen. We took a unanimous vote on the, and I'm just surprised the clerk, if she didn't pass that on to you, we took a unanimous vote, and we supported a Saturday that would be an option in the month of March. And I know Dan Ardito was on that board at the time, and he had kids that are in school. I think we're going in the opposite direction. If you want to go like the first Saturday in May, then the second Saturday in May, then the third, or the second Saturday in June, as the weather gets hot, we're going to have a lot less people at the town meeting. We want to go in the opposite direction. And I think you need to change this, or you need to have another discussion. We're looking at doing something in the month of March, when there is, number one, if there's no Holy Communion, and number two, no sports. That's when you're going to get people to come out. So we're going in the opposite direction. So we need to modify this. I think it's gonna, what it started today, but that would be my, that was the board's suggestion, a unanimous vote. Valerie Ginwich was there, just have the clerk look at the minutes. Supported a Saturday in March. No sports, no Holy Communion, or any other, I mean, I don't know what other religions on a certain day on Saturday. Just trying to get folks to the town meeting. So if you could take a look at that and incorporate that.
Yeah, I can certainly take a
Thank
look
you,
at
Jeff.
that. The, you know, just.
Budget process.
Well, yeah, the challenge is going to be with a March meeting is that, as it is right now, you know, one of the things that is key to the budget process is understanding what is happening in terms of state aid. And typically, the governor and the legislature, we're lucky if we have a foggy idea as to what is happening when we have town meeting in late April, early May. If we're now talking about March, you know, we're not going to have any idea what state aid, you know, we can certainly make projections, but it just makes it more difficult putting a budget together if we're having a town meeting in March, because ultimately the process is backed up, you know, several months to make sure we do that, because I have, per the Town Managers Act, I have to present a budget 90 days prior to town meeting. So if we have a meeting in March, now I'm presenting a budget to the Board of Selectmen 3 months before that. We're hardly into the new fiscal year, and I'm putting a budget together. So I mean, certainly we can, at this point, this survey has gone out. We can look at whether there's a way to put out the prospect of March dates, but I just point that out. It makes it much more difficult.
No, we did, if I could miss it, no, we did talk about that, because I did brought that up, you know, the board. I know there's a budget process, but it might take a year or two to maybe implement it over a period of time, because I would imagine you'd have to, like you say, change the budget time. And I know sometimes it's just a great guess what's going on with the state, but we just started that today. I don't see, I know we'd have to look at it, but it would be nice to have that as an option, because that's what we voted for, and what, to understand, to go backwards, not go into the summer months, sometime in March.
All right,
You know,
well,
yeah, we can look at it.
we'll look at it.
I'd also
All right, thank
wonder, does the town charter address the annual town meeting, and does the elections come into play? Because does it say you have to have your annual town meeting after the elections? Can you have them before? I don't know, you know, you'd have to look at the town charter as well, because that could.
Right.
I agree.
Yeah.
What?
We'll look
Because
at it.
that might be an issue as well.
Both of our lawyers just left.
Currently, it is stated in the in the bylaws that the town, the elections occur, a week in advance of the town meeting.
Right,
So that would have to be revised.
Yeah, I mean, that would be, and I don't know if that's part of the town charters.
Right.
Let me just take a look at it.
Has this been, so this has already been sent out? Because I was gonna say, it's too bad there wasn't a comment section on it. I didn't see a comment section for people just to
Yeah.
write.
Yeah, it's online
Okay.
as of today.
SurveyMonkey should allow you to
Edit that.
either create a new
There's no comment
survey
section.
or.
Well, that's what I
Yeah.
was saying,
You could
yeah.
add a question that would be a comment answer. Like perhaps a number
Oh, yeah.
10.
Yeah.
That would be simply comments. And Mr. Chairman, if I could, I just want to make sure we're clear for folks at home that this, results of this survey will have no effect on this upcoming
That's right.
year's annual town meeting. It will have to be voted on at that point. So just so people don't have no confusion there.
All right, you take a look at both, Mr. Chairman, Saturday in March and comment section.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. All right, thank you.
Saturday, March, in the comment section. But I have a little reservations on the March until we check the charter, so.
Yeah, no, that might-
Yeah,
I'm
but,
listening on.
yeah.
Not sure, right?
Or the weather forecast.
Yeah.
You want to go backwards, not forwards, man.
Then we have correspondence from Paul Regan, Executive Director of the MBTA. This is with regard to the elections that are upcoming. There's some key dates that are put forward here. And October 30th, absentee ballots are due by 5 o'clock. October 31st, the MPO municipal election at the MAPC Fall Conference meeting at 9 a.m. There's also a provision in here for so the absentee balloting, as was noted, is October 30th. Wilmington is part of the North Suburban Planning Council. In each of these various councils, the posts that are open, individuals are running unopposed. In the case of Wilmington's North Suburban Planning Council, the representative that's running is Scott Galvin. The individual from the town that is authorized to vote, if so inclined, is the chair of the board.
That's it. On to board to consider.
Board to consider, the first item was already addressed, the written consent. And the next item on the agenda is the board to consider the approval and execution of the town manager's employment agreement.
Okay. Is there a motion on the approval of the town manager's employment agreement?
So moved.
Seconded.
There's a motion made by Mr. Eaton, seconded by Mr. Loud. Is there any discussion?
Discussion?
Yes.
Thank you. I just want to take this opportunity to thank our colleagues, Mr. Loud, Mr. Eaton, for all the work that they did on this. They've actually been working since early in the summer and spent a lot of time, and I'm really complimentary of the work that you've done, the time that you've given, and I want to commend you both. I want to add that this is my first time going through a manager's contract, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to have what I believe were some very constructive conversations with the manager. And I believe that this is a very conservative contract, which will be good for the residents of the town.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I just want to thank the subcommittee on putting together a contract. I know you had to work during the summer months, and you could have spent better times with your family. I get that, and I want to say thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to echo my colleagues' remarks, and thank you very much for volunteering. When I asked for a couple of members that would step up and take this task on, you two were the first to reach out, and I appreciate that very much. Did a great job in putting this all together for us, so that we were able to meet, understand the whole package, and have some frank discussions. And we came away with a good contract, we believe, for the town and for the manager. Is that it? Okay. All those in favor of approval of the town manager's agreement signify by raising a hand, and it's unanimous.
Next on the board to consider is the signing the warrant for the town elections to be held on Tuesday, November 6th. So I would just note, for the record here, we have, for that election, polls open at 7 a.m., will close at 8 p.m. To cast votes in the state election for candidates for the following offices and questions: Senator in Congress for the Commonwealth, Governor and Lieutenant Governor, Attorney General, Secretary of State, Treasurer, Auditor, Representative to Congress, Counselor for the 6th District, Representative in Congress for the 6th District, Counselor for the 5th District, Senator in General Court, that's First Essex and Middlesex, Representative in General Court, 19th Middlesex District, Representative in General Court, 21st Middlesex District, District Attorney, Northern Essex, Clerk of Courts, Middlesex County, and Register of Deeds, Middlesex North. And then, as you know, there are 3 questions on the ballot as well. So I would need a vote of the board.
Okay. A motion by Mr. Loud, seconded by Mr. Eden, in regards to the information that was just given to us by Mr. Hull regarding the state elections. All those in favor? Opposed and voted unanimously. Yeah. It doesn't even talk about early voting, by the way.
No,
Did it?
not in the,
Jonathan, do you want these back? Am I giving them to you?
It's Selectmen Loud and I have executed them. If you three
Okay.
have them, I think it's just up to the town manager and town council.
right.
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, thank you.
Next, under board to consider, Sharon George, Town Clerk, is looking to appoint additional election workers. Specifically, she's recommending Karen Bloom, Julie Sabricha Marios, Maria Burns, Nicole Vitale, and Judith Perry.
Move to grant the request.
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Any discussion? Just one on the Julie Sabraja, it's Manos, M-A-N-O-S. All those in favor? Opposed? And voted unanimously.
Board to consider the request of the Veterans Director, Lou Maglia, to light the common green for the month of November.
So
And
moved.
can I add to that, because it was in his letter, a permission to hold a Veterans Day ceremony
Yes.
on November 11th, 2018 at 11 a.m. We'll add that to the board to consider.
I'll add that to my motion as well.
Okay, is there a second? Mr. Loud. Any discussion? All in favor? Unanimous.
Next, under board to consider is a request of Mike Burns from the Wilmington Rotary to post the 1978/6 signs on the Wilmington Commons, Swain Green, Wilmington Library, 4th of July Building, Rotary Park, Whitfield Site, Wilmington Town Hall, and Yentau Park. And he writes here in his correspondence, "In our effort to make everyone aware of the serious crisis we face with drug addiction and opioid abuse, We have begun a program to both inform and educate others of the true scope of this problem. In conjunction with Samantha Reef, we have begun distributing the 1978/6 yard signs. These signs, as the attached explain, indicate the number 1978 as the Massachusetts residents who died from drug overdoses in 2017, and the number 6 indicates the number of fatal overdoses in Wilmington last year. Our hope is that these signs will cause citizens to ask both what do the numbers mean, and offer empathy for families and friends who have suffered a loss. We have established a Twitter site, number 1978, and have posted on Facebook the explanation of the message. We'd like approval to place complimentary signs on the town locations as follows, and they are the same locations. We hope that you will join with us in our effort to increase awareness of drug/opiate problems. There was a follow-up query to Mr. Burns as to how long he was looking for this. He was suggesting a month. My only comment on this would be, I certainly understand the point that's trying to be made here in terms of the visibility. I think the potential, and I really don't have any opinion one way or the other. I think the board just needs to be mindful of the fact that you may be asked going forward for similar consideration for any number of other issues, whether it's ALS or domestic violence or epilepsy. There's a whole number of issues out there clearly that people are grappling with, and I think that would be my only comment.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I think it was just about in our last meeting 2 weeks ago where almost every person at this board offered comment to Ms. Reef and the Chief Pagonis that whatever we can do to help in this crisis, and I think this is one way that we can try to help spread awareness, and I'm fully supportive of this.
Yeah, I have seen some of these signs out and about town at various homes. It does certainly make you ask the question, about this tragic issue. Okay, is there a motion to permit the Rotary to use these particular spots for a 30-day period?
So moved.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Loud, seconded by Mr. Bendel. Any other discussion? All in favor? Unanimous?
Next is the board to consider a request of Jean Chang, who's the co-chair of the Wilmington Council of the Arts, for the appointment of 2 additional members, Judy Hughes and Holly Popio. By statute, the council membership can range anywhere from 5 to 22. I believe there are 9 people on the council right now. We do have a couple of folks who have been there for some time that have not been able to attend the meetings of late due to some health issues. Both of these women, it's my understanding from the conversations that have been had, have been very involved in activities, either working with the kids in terms of some of the projects that go on through the Arts Council, and just generally volunteering.
And
this
serving
appointment
on this,
I was going to say, this appointment would run through April of 2020.
and serving on this doesn't stop someone from outside of Wilmington to be on this committee.
No.
As you note, one is from Andover, one is from North Reading. Okay. So, is there a motion to approve their appointments?
So moves.
Mr. McCoy made the motion, seconded by Mr. Loud. Any discussion? All in favor? Unanimous.
And then we have a request from We're One Wilmington to place signs on the common for the Festival of Trees. This has been a request made in the past. My only suggestion is, as was consistent with the board's granting for RMLD, you'll recall when they had requested the signs for their open house in October, the expectation was that they would be able to post 4 signs, 2 on the Church Street side and 2 on the Middlesex side.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Mr. Loud, second?
Second.
Mr. Eaton, to have Where One Wilmington post Festival of Trees for December 1st and 2nd at the Common. All in favor? Opposed and voted unanimously. Okay, and that brings us to public comments. Is there any public comment? Yes, please, name and address.
Hi, Frank West, 2 Birchwood Road, Wilmington. Couple of quick comments. One regarding the future of, or potential future of town meeting. Just a comment, a suggestion that maybe the budget side of the house, if there's probably the first, I don't know, 15 articles or so are budgetary in nature. Maybe those could be handled at one meeting. And then for lack of a better term, the warrant articles plus the petition warrant articles could be held at a different meeting. I think maybe Tewksbury, if I'm not mistaken, I think Tewksbury might do something like that. So just, like I say, something to consider on that. The other thing is that, and again, you know, I've been talking about, you know, affordable housing and all that, and I'm wondering on a couple of quick things. One, you guys are talking to, like the Middlesex 3 and maybe other coalitions of towns, where a lot of people are being hit with the potential of losing their 40B, going under the 10% so that they may be subject to 40B type regulations. Maybe you guys kind of have the ear of Secretary Ash. Maybe say, hey, look, what other solutions are there? You know, a comment is that years ago, I think the state used to offer a loan type program where if you met certain income restrictions and you had work done in your home, while the home was under that loan was covered towards the 40B number in your community. You know, is it possible that this board, maybe in conjunction with our planning director, working with other planning directors, could potentially suggest that to the state as an offering? And the other thing on that is it legal? I'm just asking the question. You know, could it be legal for the town to use an allotment from their free cash, say $500,000 or something like that? And again, I get it. It's not free. It's not, you know, the whole bit of it's reserved money. But, you know, could the town establish some sort of a revolving fund where people within the community that met certain income levels could borrow up to, say, $10,000, $20,000 or whatever, so that they could do an improvement? Maybe they got to redo their septic or redo a roof or something like that. And again, is there a way to get that counted towards our 40B numbers? Again, just a couple of ways to kind of think out of the box a little bit. You know, we're probably, what, 50 odd units, I think I've heard that number, 50, 60 units, you know, that we may be under that under the 10% by the time the census runs around. Maybe we could, if something like that is legal, maybe that's a way we could capture a few homes. Just, again, just food for thought.
Thank you, Mr. West. Okay. Yep, Mr.
Just Rob Pasulo, 28 Marjorie Road. As I'm sitting here listening to you guys, it kind of dawns on me, maybe the universe is sending us a sign. While Jay Ash was here, there was some talk about the Lowell Street property going up. And his advice to the town was pick 3, 4, or 5 properties and go forward with your plans over there. Well, we've just spent 2 hours talking about Olin, and I know that the property across the street doesn't look fantastic. I don't know what the situation is with those, either one of them, but we got traffic problems in town. Maybe this is a sign that this may be a place to focus on and try to get a very underutilized section of town more vibrant, more businesses, more of the businesses that are positive for the town, rather than a drain or a negative. Just throwing it out there as sitting here listening to you guys, it sounds like it's a sign. Maybe this is where we start. They're all interconnected, these properties. You know, it's something that just dawned on me, I don't know. No?
Mr. Chair, I would just,
Property?
Eventually,
Which one are you talking about, Lowell Street? I'm sorry, are you talking more Lowell Street? Are you talking about?
That section of town.
The
whole
Textron
set,
portion?
Textron, you've got, you know, you've got the concrete property, that's in a butter to the Textron. You know, I don't know what the status is with that, it doesn't seem like much is being done there. And then there's the property right next to it. It seems like that's just being a parking lot for a bunch of landscapers. Maybe this is somewhere that the town can start its redevelopment efforts.
yeah, I would just note that certainly that is something that we are mindful of, the Textron property in particular. I think there's, you know, we're making efforts there to make a connection with the property owners and establish a dialogue. It's unclear right now what their long-term plans are, but I've reached out on multiple occasions and looking to try to understand what they're proposing and have an opportunity to work with them, for the town to work with them.
Thank you. Thank you. New business. Yes.
Thank you,
Mr.
Mr. Chairman. First and foremost, I want to encourage everybody to, as we always do here in Wilmington, to come out and support our Veterans Agent, Lou and Mike. They do such a great job putting on a fitting tribute to our bravest veterans and fallen heroes here in Wilmington. And on Veterans Day, I would encourage everyone to come out to the Common and support those efforts. I would secondly like to encourage everybody to get out and vote on November 6th or earlier. As we walked in here earlier tonight, around 5:30 or so, we saw folks voting already, so that's a positive. And lastly, I just want to give a shout out to the new residents that we met at the Welcome to Wilmington event at the library. Again, Mr. Kyra was there, as well as our manager, Jeff Hull, and many other representatives of the town and groups and organizations that the Wilmington has to offer. It was really nice. In the last couple of years, I've gone to the event each year. This was the biggest turnout I've seen, and so it was nice to meet some new friends and neighbors from as far away as Alaska and California, and as even far away as Reading, Woburn, and Billerica. So it just confirms to me that Wilmington is the greatest place to live, and all these people we want to welcome here to Wilmington. So thank you.
Okay.
I'm good.
Anybody have that? All set?
I wanted to give a shout out to, not only is a U.S. Marine Corps veteran, but he's a great human being. Mickey Rooney passed away on October 17th. He was a great guy. I knew him a little. A couple times I interacted with him. He was just super nice, but he's a Vietnam veteran. He was a Wilmington good guy. He won the award in 2002. His passion was the Pan Mass Channel, the PMC. He rode a bike for over 30 years that benefited the Dana-Farber Institute. So I want to thank him in postpartum, but also his family for his service to the country and to the community. So thank you. Also, it was mentioned in one of Lou's letters about the green lights for the Common. Also, consider replacing one of your lights outside green. I did it last year and I kept them on all year, so just consider that. And I know they have them for sale at Ace Hardware, so thank you.
Thank you. I just want to remind everybody that Halloween is Wednesday, the 31st, and be careful out there. There'll be a lot of little kids running around and trying to get some candy for their basket, so those motorists that are out there, please be careful.
There are no official hours for the town for trick-or-treating, correct?
No.
Okay, I
Yeah.
believe one of the news websites had reported that it was to start at 4:30, but my recollection was we never did a specific time.
Yeah, we never did a
Nobody
stop
can-
time, but it generally ends around 8 o'clock.
Right.
Or when the lights go out because you ran out of candy. So, I don't know, yeah. So, that's the other alternative. Okay, important dates.
Important dates. The October 22nd, early voting, Town Hall Auditorium, Monday, 8:30 a.m. to 7 p.m., Tuesday through Friday, 8:30 to 4:30 p.m. This goes through November 2nd. Then October 26th, Haunted Woods, Haunted Tavern, 6:30 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. Again, on the 27th, same location, same times. October 27th, early voting, Town Hall, 8:30 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. That's a Saturday. October 28th, Horribles Parade, Rotary Park, 4:30 p.m. November 4th, Herndon Tavern, Open House, 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. November 4th, turn clocks back, change detectors, detector batteries. And then November 5th to December 7th, curbside collection of yard waste. November 6th, state elections, polls open 7 a.m., close at 8 p.m. Veterans Day is the 11th, Town Common, 11 a.m. Town offices are closed on November 12th, and November 13th is the next Board of Selectmen's meeting, 6:30 p.m.
And that's it. So we're looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
By Mr. Eaton, second by Mr. McCoy. Any discussion? All in favor? Unanimous? Thank you and good night.